What may be more difficult than creating a masterpiece, especially one that changes the direction of a series or franchise, is being able to continue on. When something becomes so beloved by fans and draws in so many new ones, the expectations for the future become daunting. You have to prove you know which changes garnered its success. What direction do you want to take it next? Which aspects should be brought back from the older entries? How do we create something that stands alone without abandoning the qualities that made it successful? Tears of the Kingdom took up this challenge, to become a sequel which not only expands on this brand new formula, but proves that this is the correct direction for the series. The expectations of this sequel come from so many directions. Some fans wanted a return to the more classical style of gameplay, others wanted more of the same or perhaps just some tweaks to this new gameplay loop. Ever since the game's release, I've seen opinions from so many different angles on dungeons, exploration, story, and so much more that completely disagree with each other. For some of us, the game met our expectations, and in some places even exceeded it. Yet, somehow, these things that even go beyond what we hoped create this feeling of something missing. I don't think I've ever played a video game that confused my feelings about it quite as much as Tears of the Kingdom. Especially with everything I said in my previous video, this game went beyond my personal expectation and did exactly what I wanted it to do. So why was there any hesitation on how I felt? After sitting with this game for so long, I couldn't help but have one strong feeling I could not budge. Many of the things that Tears of the Kingdom copies from Breath of the Wild, it does incredibly well, and in many aspects significantly improves. But it is where this game decides to do something different and unique to this sequel is where it stands out. However, it is in these parts that the game can feel like it really holds back, as if it was reined in by the fear of these expectations. By really understanding where Tears of the Kingdom tries to become more of its own thing, I started to see this game as something beyond incredible, but also something I wish I got so much more of. Breath of the Wild challenged the conventions of Zelda that had been established over the years, bringing the series back to its more non-linear roots. Not only could dungeons be done in any order, but whether or not you even complete them all is entirely up to the player. Combat can be approached in multiple ways, any mountain can be climbed up, any quest can be completed at almost any time. The adventure is entirely yours. For many players, one of the greatest strengths of the game was the feeling of discovery, yet that feeling of discovering something new for the first time couldn't be replicated on repeat playthroughs. Enjoyment when returning to the game was going to be more dependent on the gameplay. Many of the issues in the replayability of Breath of the Wild came down to its balancing. The rupees, items, and upgrades that you needed to get through the game were minimal at best, and even when you did need them, they would easily be obtained while doing the main quests. Engaging in combat could be unrewarding, and never really felt like a requirement outside of bosses, and the rupees you could earn from selling made side quests completely irrelevant. Earning good equipment was more dependent on finding random weapons in shrines, rather than something the player could always do when they needed weapons. This made weapons far more precious than the durability system was built for, and yet Breath of the Wild is nothing short of a masterpiece. So outside of these small balance changes, how could the series possibly move forward and get better? While the world of Hyrule was vast, there was certainly potential to add in much more content. This began by adding the DLC packs to Breath of the Wild, putting in some new ideas and content that could not be put in the original game. Yet the development team found themselves with too many ideas to be able to put in through just DLC packs. Rather than pick and choose what content to put in another DLC pack, the team ultimately decided to take all of their ideas and from it create a sequel. A lot of the ideas they had for the DLC, which made it into the sequel, were plans originally made for the base game of Breath of the Wild, which could not be fully realised. Even the additions of the caves and Sky Islands were ideas that came from the original development of Breath of the Wild, but issues with timing and the processing power of the Wii U prevented their implementations. Parts of Tears of the Kingdom's story that include a destroyed Master Sword and an injured Link with a replacement arm are things that come from the concept art of Breath of the Wild. So from this, the development team began Tears of the Kingdom, pulling together all these unused ideas and things they couldn't accomplish before, with new ideas that they gained along the way. Once the game was in a completed state, it wasn't released for another year, giving the team as much time as possible to make sure all of the various engines in the game worked as intended, a level of polish that is rare in the current age of video games. After almost 4 years of waiting since its announcement, and almost 6.5 years after first being able to explore this Hyrule, we were finally able to head beneath Hyrule Castle. Players will return to Hyrule likely feeling that they know the world they're going into and are prepared for the challenges ahead. The game's prologue challenges this. We open beneath Hyrule Castle, an area we previously didn't know existed, following Link and Zelda as they explore the dark tunnels beneath. An ominous track plays in the background, with mysterious voices chanting, the music getting heavier and faster as the player descends deeper into the land below. Within these passages lie relics of an ancient time, including murals that describe a period of history that is mostly unknown. The more you discover, the more you realise that you do not know everything about this world that you've been exploring for so many years. More murals are obscured by rubble that you cannot read, a mystery that you will carry with you throughout the game, hoping to discover. Once you descend to the deepest part of these tunnels, as the gloom grows thicker, you come across a large platform, with a lifeless, mummified body leaking with this gloom and a swirl of green energy rising from it. The tension builds up to the moment you approach this body, and the hand holding it down falls off, leaving behind a stone. The corpse starts to awaken with stiffened and grotesque movement until its eyes pierce the darkness, with gloom bursting out of the body's chest, attacking our protagonists. This unknown enemy not only drains Link of most of his strength, but completely shatters the Master Sword. The power that had helped Link save the kingdom once before is no longer enough. But as the shard of the sword flies forward, it scrapes across the demon's face, making him bleed. A small glimmer of hope. Link and Zelda are taunted by this demon, who speaks to them with a voice that, while sounding withered, is incredibly chilling and intimidating. He falls back into the darkness as the platform crumbles away, leaving behind ruin. Zelda falls with the platform, with Link throwing the Master Sword away to jump after her, but fails only to watch her disappear with the blinding light. This all happens within what feels like just a moment, but almost every part of it gives the player so many questions. What was the stone Zelda picked up? Who is Rauru? How does the mummy know who Link and Zelda are? The prologue welcomes you back to this version of Hyrule, and through its masterful work in creating an atmosphere of tension and mystery, the world the player thought they knew so much about becomes almost completely unknown once again. Your first meeting with the Demon King makes you feel weak, with a long journey ahead to gain strength. When returning to Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom, I found myself engaging in the world from the very beginning, whether it was exploring every cave, clearing each enemy camp, earning rewards from side quests, or even collecting every item in a forest. The game posed a greater purpose for each thing that you do in its world. So is this enough for it to succeed? Breath of the Wild took the series back to its original roots in 1986 to create the most open and engaging version of Hyrule, a masterpiece in exploration and discovery. Tears of the Kingdom had the immense challenge of being the first game to take this further, attempting to evolve an already incredible game to give it more depth. Whether this is through simple balance changes, various types of gameplay found in different areas, or new abilities and systems to interact with the world around you. As we go through this sequel, we will be asking what stayed the same, what's been improved, where does it get things wrong, and what can we hope for in the future. I hope you enjoy your time as we break down this sequel that dared to take on the expectations of being the next step in evolving this legendary series. The Zelda series has often had a theme of the hero coming back from failure as something stronger. It acts as a display of Link's courage that even in the face of immense power, he manages to pull through and use that to his advantage. This is a theme that started in A Link to the Past, where he was pulled into the Dark World after losing a fight to Aghanim. After this loss, he uses travel between the worlds of light and darkness to his advantage. We see this theme in almost every single Zelda game from here on, yet it wasn't quite the same in Breath of the Wild. The game implies that at no point is Link truly stronger than he was 100 years ago. Once we return to Tears of the Kingdom, we see this theme return in full force. After losing his arm and the Master Sword to Ganondorf's attack, he comes back as a greater force, against the odds, with a powerful arm granting him new abilities, determined to find Princess Zelda and save Hyrule. Link awakens with his new arm on the Great Sky Island, the main tutorial area of the game, reminiscent of the Great Plateau in the prequel. While many parts of it are incredibly similar, such as introducing you to new abilities through 4 different shrines, guided by the spirit of a King of Hyrule, it has one significant difference: linearity. It's through this linearity that the game attempts to slowly introduce the player to the more complicated aspects added to this game for returning players, while also being able to introduce everything to new players. This is achieved through the shape of the island, as well as the blocks in progress that require certain abilities to be unlocked and used, almost like a traditional dungeon. The new abilities that Link has in this game are more than what the Sheikah Slate runes were in Breath of the Wild. Some of the abilities that you get from the Sheikah Slate runes still exist in this game through the item system, but we'll go into that in more detail later on. But the abilities that you gain here are a lot more fundamental to the game itself. While you can perhaps argue that, due to the linearity, the Great Skyland is not as fun as the Great Plateau, it does a great job at showing the player how useful and important the abilities can be in the open world in order to progress, unlike the Sheikah Slate runes that simply allowed you to earn a few extra chests in the plateau. Once you have all of these new abilities, the island no longer feels linear. It becomes incredibly easy to navigate, making these abilities feel a lot more useful. I don't believe the Great Sky Island needed to be as open as the plateau was, purely because most people know what Breath of the Wild was like. The plateau was great at teaching the player how to explore, but the Great Sky Island teaches the player how to traverse, and it does a good job at it. The new abilities in this game, with the exception of one, are not like traditional Zelda items at all, but entirely new gameplay systems, changing how you interact with the world around you. The first ability you will unlock is Ultra Hand. It's easy to understand the initial concept of it if you're familiar with the powers in Breath of the Wild and how their usage has been evolved by the fanbase over time. Fans were able to use magnesis to break the game in strange ways, including creating flying vehicles. Though it can be tricky to get it to work, it's accessible to any player. Ultra Hand comes from embracing this and posing 2 simple questions. Do we have to limit this to metal objects, and can we make this ability something that expands the player's creativity? And from this we have Ultra Hand. The ability works by allowing you to manipulate and move any free object, and the player can also glue these items together in any orientation. On the Great Sky Island, the developers make a point of showing you how important this ability is by forcing the player to use it to be able to move forward once it's obtained. Whether this is building bridges, boats, or even rail cars, the things you need to craft for this ability will gradually get more complex until the player is likely very well versed in this ability, and will therefore be more likely to use it whenever they can. This ability has endless uses. At the start of my first playthrough, this was mainly used to build overly large bridges to cross any gaps and scale heights, but later on you'll be able to attach items to it that allow you to build traps, vehicles, weapons. What you can build is almost entirely up to what the player can think of, with very little limitation. Depending on your skill with this ability, you can use it to play through the game in an entirely different way, though if you wish, this ability can be used minimally outside of it being required in puzzles. The freedom you have with this ability can almost be overwhelming at the start, but in time it becomes second nature to use. I expect to continue to be surprised at what people will be able to come up with and create. But outside of creating things, this ability is often used in puzzles, and we'll go into that in more detail later. Now, it may seem that this ability has been made too powerful due to it not being limited to metal like magnesis was, but I will argue that this is not actually the case. Just because you can move things around, it doesn't necessarily mean it will provide you with any use at all, and this is also a credit to how carefully the game has been designed. Furthermore, freedom can make puzzle solving more difficult. When you saw metal in Breath of the Wild, it was a lot easier to recognise that maybe you should be using magnesis here. With the freedom to move any object, you have to think more about where it would actually be useful to grab and move something around. Puzzles are not the same as they were in Breath of the Wild, so while Ultra Hand may have made some puzzles easier if it was in Breath of the Wild, the challenge is made appropriate to the toolkit here, and even opens up a lot more possibilities. Going back to the initial reveal for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the trailer we were shown took place entirely underground. Many people therefore assumed that a way they would expand the world of Hyrule would be the underground. It wasn't until 2021 that we actually saw the game, but to our surprise, we were shown the world above Hyrule more than we were below. What was interesting to me was seeing Ascend. Perhaps it was because we were shown this ability first in the sky, so we assumed it was a sky ability, but once we saw how Ascend worked in the gameplay reveal, its original purpose became apparent. This is a way to exit underground sections and caves, preventing these areas from ruining the interconnectivity that Breath of the Wild had established. If you were on top of a mountain, you could leave with ease by jumping down and gliding. So how would you solve this in a cave? And in true fashion of this modern Zelda team, the simplest answer is given without fear of it giving the player too much freedom. The Ascend ability for Tears of the Kingdom is as essential to the freedom of mobility as paragliding and climbing was in Breath of the Wild. I can almost guarantee that this is the origin of this ability with what we know about this team's development. It's likely that they wanted to expand the world of Hyrule both with the caves and beneath the surface, with a method to exit out of them without being forced to use fast travel. This ability works really well for this purpose, especially in caves, as you can explore even the deepest caves without having any fear of not being able to exit them. This also allows the player to easily reach the top of mountains by entering them inside and ascending through. When approaching platform-based puzzles, Ascend also takes a spin on similar items from past entries, such as the claw shot. The primary difference here is that instead of a clear marker showing that you can grapple here, you have to see a ledge and remind yourself that you can ascend through it. In my previous video, a large part of the discussion was about 3 flaws of the game. Firstly, I talked about the durability system. I stated that it wasn't the durability system that was inherently the problem, but instead a lack of the ability to replace items if they broke. When fighting a camp of enemies, defeating these enemies doesn't provide you with any method to replace the weapons, so it's better to avoid fighting them altogether. Another issue was the lack of interconnectivity between the areas of the map. All sections of the map were entirely independent of each other, where no resources in one area would give you significant help in another. And finally, the third issue I discussed was how many of the resources' greatest value was, well, their value in rupees, especially the case with gemstones that had no use outside of selling them and earning a ton of rupees, and this made side quests completely pointless. I suggested that one change could fix all 3 of these things at once: a proper crafting system. And so, with Tears of the Kingdom, not only was I delighted to see that this was implemented, but it was done in a way that was way better than I imagined. The Zelda team had created a fluid, intuitive, and instantaneous weapon crafting system with Fuse. As we were seeing more and more of the game, this was the most exciting reveal to me, as it had the potential to solve some of the biggest issues that I had with the predecessor. It was only until I played the game myself could I say that it worked just as well as I had hoped. Fuse allows you to attach any item, whether it's a free object in the overworld or an item from your inventory, to either your weapon or shield, and additionally allows you to add any item in your inventory onto an arrow. This not only adds attack power to your weapon, but it can also increase its durability. This often works by having a base weapon, such as a sword, with an item such as a monster's horn. One of the coolest things I could do in combat would be to go up against a tough group of enemies, but try and focus on the most powerful one. If I was successful in defeating them, I could use that enemy's horn and craft a new weapon during combat that would tip the scale in my favour. Durability is also dependent on the item you have fused to your weapon, with most weapons allowing an additional 25 hits to your weapon, which can sometimes more than double a weapon's durability. Because of this system, almost all the different classes of base weapons can be somewhat viable at any point in the game. They do have differences in their damage, but this is minimal comparatively once you've used Fuse to improve it. Therefore, to make each weapon stand out, base weapons now have individual properties, such as an improved flurry rush or improved charge attacks, and sometimes even scaling properties when fused with appropriate materials. But one thing we should discuss is how Fuse can affect the scaling between the different weapon types. In Breath of the Wild, the difference in damage between one-handed and two-handed weapons averaged to a 44% increase in damage. When we consider Fuse, it initially seems that the increase in damage points between one and two-handed weapons of the same class is only a 15% increase in damage on average, making two-handed weapons seem like they have a much lower DPS. However, there is a secret scaler in the game for both two-handed weapons and spears. Two-handed weapons will do an additional 5% damage than what the numbers show, and spears will do 25% less damage than what they show, though this is still far from the damage difference you would have in Breath of the Wild. After doing many calculations and in-game tests, it appears that two-handed weapons are now less powerful than they were in Breath of the Wild once you introduce Fuse, but due to scalars, it is certainly less significant a difference than it might seem on the surface, so I am glad that they bothered to put these scalars in as a way to try and balance everything. If you were ever wondering why enemy health is hidden in this game and no armor shows you their health values this time around, it's likely because of the various scalars that now exist within the game to balance the combat out. Therefore, there might be other scalars that I'm not aware of. In the prequel, I usually kept a good number of claymores in my inventory, but I just found myself completely avoiding picking them up in this game. And I bring this up because this is the only downside that Fuse has. Much like how the rest of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom works in terms of the physics engine, applying your logic and ingenuity to solve puzzles, Fuse almost always works exactly as you expect it to. Whether it's adding a heavy and flat horn to act as a hammer and smash through rock, something with elemental properties to provide elemental attacks, or attaching various objects on your shield for mobility, such as a railcar or rocket, a spring, or even frozen meat. But using Fuse on your sword and shield is only really the beginning. You can use Fuse to attach items from your inventory onto your arrows. Monster horns that you have in your inventory, which may be too weak to make weapons with, can now be placed on an arrow just to add some additional damage. Depending on what elemental item you put on your arrow will also determine the impact the element has. While a fire fruit will add a small flame to your arrow, a ruby causes a devastating explosion. There are also some items that only provide benefits for bows, such as wings which let you shoot arrows further, or eyeballs which you can use as a homing arrow. A lot of these items are usable in both combat and puzzles. In this way, they act almost like traditional Zelda items. Whether it's bomb flowers acting similarly to how they did in traditional games, or elemental fruits that provide you with elemental arrows, these resources can be found from the very start and open up your exploration of the world. And stepping outside of Fuse for a moment, there have been massive improvements in the amounts of buffs you can earn from items you collect. Thanks to the addition of things such as sticky lizards and sticky frogs, the player now has a way to navigate the terrain when it's raining, something which was much needed. An additional change is the new buffs which power you up in certain conditions. For example, a buff which increases your damage in hot areas. This gives you a greater importance to having the correct armor sets for different areas. Let's say you were wearing a heat-proof armor so you can survive a hot area, you can then also apply a buff which boosts your attack damage in the heat. Such a combination can be useful when you're fighting against Gleeoks, which affect the environment around them. But maybe the best part is how materials can now just act like old school Zelda items. While you can attach them to your arrows for further reach, any material can be thrown, allowing you to still use its ability. This lets so many items have a sense of individuality and purpose. Another aspect to items we should discuss are Zonai devices. These devices are often powered by Link's energy cell, which is described by the developers as this game's version of the magic meter. This meter exclusively powers Zonai tech, whether it's for combat, puzzles, or transport. The majority of these devices are purposefully designed after more modern technologies found in the real world, such as fans and wheels. And this was done so that players could understand how they should work immediately, removing any additional layer of things the player needs to figure out, and likely helping it improve the creativity. Basically, if it looks like something from real life, it will probably behave in a way that the player expects. This was an important thing to do, especially considering one of the things that made Breath of the Wild so incredible was that the physics and chemistry engines were implemented in such a way that anything you tried to do acted in a way you would expect, so puzzle solving could be more intuitive. When adding technology to the game, you have to be careful that this doesn't therefore ruin this new core principle of the series. These devices really allow puzzle solving to expand when paired with Ultra Hand and Fuse, with the main use being attaching these devices together and to other objects, creating anything you need to progress, from platforms to pulley systems and even advanced machines. Simply knowing what item might be useful on its own is not enough. You will have to come up with your own solution using a combination of different objects and devices in order to create a solution. There is this genius to these devices. They can act like traditional Zelda items that you never have to learn how to use. Many items in Zelda that can even be the main item in a dungeon are incredibly simple, from a wand that makes fire or ice to something that allows you to jump higher, or a shield that reflects light. Because the only controls you'll need to know are using Ultra Hand and Fuse and then your other weapons, you can be given any item and use it easily in a way you would expect. In traditional Zelda, you would be given a mirror shield to manipulate light and solve puzzles. In Tears of the Kingdom, you can find a mirror and decide to either move it around freely or even attach it to your shield and create a mirror shield. And even though we're talking about Zonai devices here, as I mentioned before, this extends to a ton of items that you can just pick up and throw or shoot, such as ice berries and bomb flowers. This is where I believe this game landed on something incredible. Ultra Hand and Fuse being a gameplay system that allows you to use Zonai devices, items, and objects to craft your own Zelda items for what you need. This is a system that would be almost perfect, but it does have a very significant flaw. The main way to earn Zonai devices is to trade Zonai charges at these dispensers, found mainly around the Sky Islands. Each dispenser has its own set of devices it can reward you with when you trade in Zonai charges, which are dropped mainly from construct enemies. Which devices the dispensers will give you is randomized from their limited selection. Now, we will talk more about the impacts that these devices have at different parts of the game as and when it is appropriate, but there is something that I do want to mention now. The ability to dispense a limitless amount of Zonai devices from dispensers and store them in your inventory can almost ruin the game entirely, and due to the game's design, it can feel unnecessary. Zonai devices allow you to bypass almost every single part of the gameplay that the player should be engaging in. Whenever it is appropriate and useful to have these devices, they're given to you. This extends to shrines, main dungeons, sky islands, parts of the depths, and even the surface. The parts of the map that have Korok puzzles and chests that you can earn often enough give you a selection of devices to see if you can complete it with them, and it's a lot more fun this way. The Sky Islands also have sections where you can find devices lying around and create things that let you fly from island to island. At the start of the game, you'll probably only be able to use the devices you find lying around, and if you don't use them well, you fail the puzzle. This is good, this is a limitation that works. But if you have 10 steering wheels, 20 rockets, and 40 fans in your inventory, there is no longer a puzzle. This makes the early game a much more engaging experience, but as the player goes further through, all limitations are absent, and a lot of that engagement is lost. We'll talk about a few more examples of this as we go on later, as there are parts that this affects a lot more than others. I don't believe there should have been no way to use these devices outside of when they're given, but there's already an ability that would solve this. Auto-build. Auto-build is an ability that lets you rebuild things you've created before, from your recent history of creations, ones you've saved, or designs you can unlock. Any parts you are missing can be created, but you have to use Zonite in order to do this. This is a material that you can find as you explore the depths. If we imagine that earning and storing Zonai devices was far more limited, by not having so many devices in your inventory and being more dependent on using auto-build, it would begin to mitigate the problem by requiring Zonite. This is because Zonite is a much more difficult thing to earn than Zonai charges, and it's also earned from a different map, being the depths. It gives the idea of a choice of where the player can access difficulty. You can either be limited to build with what you find lying around, or explore the more difficult depths in order to earn Zonite, so you can use auto-build whenever you need it. At least this way, the depths would actually be a more fundamental part of this gameplay loop. I do think this would have worked well, especially if it was paired with an area that has all the Zonai devices you've used before in an unlimited supply, so you could create new things for auto-build. But you would have to use a lot of Zonite to create them and can't just use the large amount of items in your inventory. You shouldn't be able to store a ton of rockets in your inventory with no limit and pull them out whenever you want to quickly skip a puzzle. You can use them when you find them or attach them to a shield, taking up an inventory slot. And in my opinion, that should have been it. For example, having a rocket or spring attached to a shield in order to reach a certain height more easily. Using up a shield slot to be able to keep these devices in your inventory is great, and it could be immensely satisfying, but instead you can have 50 rockets in your inventory and use them whenever. This stops something that could feel like a smart decision in inventory management to something that feels like cheating. It would be like if Breath of the Wild gave you the Master Cycle 0 from the beginning and you could just dispense fuel for it whenever, using bokoblin horns or something else. Or imagine if you could summon pools of water or metal ramps and be able to use Cryonis and Magnesis with them whenever you wanted. I'm not saying Zonai dispensers should have absolutely been removed, but I don't think it's controversial to say that it should have been balanced a lot better. Much like how I stopped myself from selling items in Breath of the Wild to have more fun on repeat playthroughs, when replaying Tears of the Kingdom, stopping myself from using the Zonai dispensers makes the game exponentially more fun. These items and abilities are not too much for this game. I wouldn't argue that they're too powerful, but there's just a little bit of a balance issue that can really tip the scale. But there is one more ability that I really want to talk about. Puzzles and combat that makes the player interact with the world around them is an aspect of Zelda that has always been strong. Breath of the Wild was created to push that boundary, to make almost every object interactive so that everything around you could be used and could be considered for the solution to either a puzzle or to defeating an enemy. Such a boundary is pushed further with Recall. This ability is given to you as Zelda's Sage's Vow. When activating this ability, time around you freezes, allowing you to select any object and reverse its motion through time. This adds another layer to puzzles, as not only are you considering using objects through the physics engine, but now you also add the layer of their position in time. Limitations on this ability are also minimal. There is no cooldown to using it, and there is almost no limit on the object you can use this on. On a technical level, this ability is very impressive. Every inanimate object has its positional motion stored in memory, so that Recall can reverse this motion accurately. One thing that really impressed me was using Recall after I'd used the Zonai dispenser, being able to see how any one of these capsules could have their motion reversed. And what I found to be the best thing about this ability is how its usefulness throughout the game is entirely up to the player more than any of the other abilities or even any Zelda item has been. For example, players can use Recall as a safety net, allowing them to return objects to their original position if, let's say, they dropped something off the edge of a sky island. The ability can also be paired with Ultra Hand, allowing the player to lift a flying device into the air for an easy takeoff. While some players have found more complicated ways to use Recall in combat, you can do very easy things like returning some projectiles that enemies will throw at you. Just another way that the game is able to expand the combat loop. Though I'll go into shrines in greater depth later on, some shrines show the best example of how having Recall always in the back of your head can prove to be a great advantage. Throughout this video I'll be mentioning parts of the game that I found it could be used, often in really cool ways. If you didn't find Recall to be all that useful in another playthrough of the game, give Recall a try in every shrine you enter. You may surprise yourself in how useful it may be. Recall stands out to me in how different it is to the other three abilities. Ultra Hand, Ascend, and Fuse are core changes to the gameplay and how you interact with the world around you, but Recall is something different. Outside of some shrines, it's something that you are rarely encouraged to use, but it is a freedom given to the player to use at will. The game intentionally teaches you a lot less about the ways you can use Recall compared to the other abilities, allowing its usefulness to be discovered by the player over time. And to me, it made finding ways that I could make things easier using Recall one of the most satisfying parts of the game, and at a push, I might even say the whole series. Aside from puzzle solving, these abilities can add a whole new layer to combat, using Ultra Hand to create large and crazy weapons or traps, and Fuse to forge weapons that can apply many different status effects to enemies. But first, I do want to talk about the basic hand-to-hand combat, as I had some issues of note in my previous video that I was hoping would improve this time around. Parrying is definitely something I was interested in seeing in this game, as I had a slight problem with it in Breath of the Wild due to its very limited use. If, when fighting an enemy, you decided to parry an attack rather than flurry rush, you would get fewer hits on the enemy, doing less damage overall. Furthermore, if you mistime a dodge, you will likely still avoid the attack. If you incorrectly time a parry, you get hit. The only benefit against any normal attack with a parry is that you do not need directional accuracy, as a vertical or horizontal attack can be parried either way, unlike the flurry rush. But most enemies would wind up so slowly that it's easy to tell the direction that they were going to hit you anyway. Finally, you could use parrying to disarm an enemy, but your shield had to be way more powerful than the enemy you were fighting, so this was almost pointless. So is parry much better this time around? Well, yes and no. Firstly, there is a new move that many of the common enemy types have, such as bokoblins, being a head ram. This move is definitely much better to parry than to dodge, as enemies can chase you down after you dodge to the side. This was a great addition, and while there are a couple more examples of moves like this, I do wish there were quite a few more. Due to Fuse, the parry can be a more useful ability if you're willing to explore with it. Some items can increase the ability to disarm, which can be useful. Furthermore, parrying with a fused item that has an elemental or status effect on it will apply this to the enemy you're hitting. This means that using a parry outside of actually parrying an attack can act as an elemental attack. You can then follow up with a different melee attack. Shattering a frozen enemy does 3 times the damage in most cases, so having an ice shield with a fire weapon is a great way to take down a group of tough enemies. So while I'll argue Fuse doesn't necessarily make parrying itself better, it definitely improves your options instead of just using Flurry Rush. But overall, the Flurry Rush was and still is a much better option, and makes the parry feel like a bad choice, which I feel is odd considering it's harder to pull off and requires you to have a shield. The main responses I received defending Breath of the Wild's parry was saying, oh, it only exists for parrying Octoroks and Guardian Beams, but that doesn't mean it can't be useful in general combat. In Tears of the Kingdom, even that no longer stands. Guardian Beams are no longer present, and Octorok attacks are better countered using recall. So in this way, the parry is almost less useful than it was before. I know that I'm nitpicky about this, like super nitpicky, but I just wish that a high skill combat option gave an appropriate reward. But considering how complex the combat system is now, letting you use so many different items to create different weapons and tools, I don't think it's much of a problem anymore. Another cool improvement comes in the form of enemy combos. I mentioned in my previous video that enemies have an issue when it comes to their increasing difficulty. Higher tier enemies may have more health and do more damage, but by doing the exact same moves you've been used to the whole game, combat would often become stale and not actually feel any harder. My wish was that as enemies increase in difficulty tier, from red to blue to black, etc., that they would have extended combos with different moves that you have to learn. And in Tears of the Kingdom, we have exactly that. There are a few points where I was taken off guard, not expecting a combo to extend and causing me to get hit because I thought I had an opening. These moments were genuinely exciting, as even with fighting bokoblins, there were things I had to relearn as I got further into the game. Higher level enemies may also avoid your line of sight when aiming at them with a bow, making it more difficult to hit them from afar and forcing you to face them head on. However, for the sake of covering all grounds, I will say that the issue still partially stands, as these new moves are additional extensions to combos, rather than completely fresh combos or just new moves. If you know the first few moves of an enemy's combo, you'll still be able to flurry rush them probably before you even see any of their new moves, and this can make fights with higher difficulty enemies stop feeling any different. Experienced players from Breath of the Wild will likely crumple enemies quickly before they even know that these enemies have new moves. I know it took me a while before I even noticed harder enemies could extend their combos. While I may seem incredibly critical, this is just to be consistent with what I said in the previous video. Though parts of the basic combat system aren't too much improved, the overall combat in this game is far more expansive and honestly a lot more fun. Using puff shrooms to give me an escape and using a stealth attack, or mudderbods to make enemies attack each other, elemental shields that provide a ton of different effects, and drones that can fight alongside me. The new item system really opened combat up, and while the basic one-to-one combat isn't different, the expansive ways you can tackle fights made them so much more engaging. And I know I've mentioned this already, but I can't say enough about how awesome it is to use Fuse mid-combat. Something about earning new resources and crafting new weapons while fighting a group of large enemies is just incredible. As much as I love Breath of the Wild, I got bored of the combat in that game incredibly quickly. With the few enemy types you fight, I learned how to flurry rush every move, and that was the extent of what I ended up doing with almost every enemy. The Tears of the Kingdom's combat kept me engaged for a lot longer, freezing time and reversing projectiles back at enemies, adding things to my shield to bounce enemies back or cause explosions if they attack me, crafting stronger weapons while dodging attacks. It felt like such a huge improvement. Larger groups of enemies made things feel more fun than tedious, and even now, I'm still having a great time with the combat. Link's new arm is more than a set of abilities. They are aspects of the gameplay that change how you will interact with this world of Hyrule, as fundamental as climbing and paragliding were in the prequel. Your imagination, intuition, and resourcefulness are the main tool here, making something even more unconfined than one of the most open and freeing games in history. There is a lot of merit in that. I'm still so impressed that a single ability in Fuse was able to solve most of the issues I had in Breath of the Wild exactly in the way that I'd hoped. But with such great improvements, unfortunately come a few new problems. I will hold my argument that these abilities, specifically Ultra Hand, are not too overpowered. The issues I do have almost always come from certain Zonai devices, which have little to no restriction on the number you can earn, how many can be stored, and where they can be used. Breath of the Wild was happy to implement limits, restricting climbing in shrines and dungeons to allow for more engaging puzzle solving. While I appreciate that the developers wanted this game to exist without restrictions, I think it's fair to say that this didn't come without some loss of challenge and engagement for many players. But outside of the new powers given to the player, there is a lot more that has changed this time around. The Kingdom of Hyrule, ravaged by the upheaval, is not the same place it was before. While most of the surface remains the same, the sky is full of islands, new monsters roam the land, caves have opened up all around, large chasms tear open the ground. Fujibayashi, the director of this game, has been working on the Zelda series since 2001, directing the Oracle games and Four Swords, but he started directing the mainline games from Skyward Sword. This system was very limited due to the hardware limitations in 2011, so was likely not the fully realised vision. But 12 years later, it has been made possible. Returning to the surface world is not only completely seamless, but feels liberating. At the end of every session exploring the Sky Islands, diving off the edge and viewing the whole world from above never really gets old. Hyrule is now a much larger map, over 2 times the size, with multiple layers to explore, all connected seamlessly. But before we get into the new worlds above and below, how has the surface changed after the upheaval? There is a new feeling of uncanny. There's something great about seeing this world change after being with it for so many years. The upheaval's effect on different areas is much more impactful, knowing what they looked like before, adding a greater feeling of urgency. The first place you're encouraged to head is Lookout Landing, but not by a marker telling you to go there. For returning players, you'll likely notice this new place didn't exist before. Once you've arrived at this new area, you'll find that it contains most of what you need for your adventure, acting as a nice home base. Whether it's to buy equipment, get extra arrows, cook, use the cursed statue, or upgrade your energy cell. Once you speak to Pura, you'll also be able to kick off the main quests. You can earn your paraglider, learn how to activate the new towers, and you'll be asked to investigate the phenomena in each region caused by the upheaval. There are additional side adventures that you can also begin here, starting with learning about the chasms that have appeared around Hyrule. From here, you can now begin your adventure across this unfamiliar Hyrule. There are many returning and new ways in which you'll end up engaging in combat, the most common often being enemy camps. While enemy camps don't have too much difference outside of some of their new, larger designs and additional enemies, their place within the game has a much greater importance. Completing a camp will still reward you with whatever you find in the chest. The biggest point of contention here will likely be that rewards in these chests may be less significant than what was found in Breath of the Wild. But what we should consider is that in Breath of the Wild, the overall reward for completing the camp was not worth the resources it took. Losing a few weapons to access a chest with a piece of amber or some arrows didn't add up to being worthwhile, as weapons of high quality are not always easy to resupply, so avoiding the camp altogether was the better option. In Tears of the Kingdom, by completing a camp, you don't only receive the reward in the chest, but a large supply of monster parts that can be used for crafting. Even the weaker enemy horns can be used for high power arrows, so every enemy defeated will be of use. A camp with no chest reward in Tears of the Kingdom can feel more rewarding overall than a camp with a chest in Breath of the Wild. Due to the increased durability from fusing, you'll often be able to use a single weapon to clear a camp, meaning the cost of clearing a camp can now just be one weapon. A brave player may also attempt to take on more powerful groups of enemies. If they are successful in defeating even one of them, the enemy's horn can be used to create a more powerful weapon, allowing them to have a fighting chance in this group. Arrows are also plentiful here. Crates lying around camps will often have a large number of arrows inside, meaning the player will likely leave a combat encounter with more arrows than they started with. Many camps challenge you with the same enemies we are used to, but the upheaval introduces many new enemy types to the world. The enemy variety comes with more depth this time around, with new enemy types having specific roles they fulfill. Though they don't make the roster of enemies huge, they provide a greater amount of variation to combat and rewards. Some of the returning enemies will be found wearing armor. Armor can only be destroyed by force, such as using blunt weapons or bombs. Having these enemies mixed in forces the player to use different weapons rather than just relying on one type. This integration type works a lot better than the standard elemental enemies. Despite being able to make elemental weapons at any time with materials that are easier to source, returning fire and ice enemies, such as Lizalfos, can still be killed in one hit. When you consider being able to use fuse on your arrows, it makes these enemies significantly easier to defeat than before. This change not being here is strange considering the new elemental enemies and bosses are simply easier to defeat using elemental attacks rather than being completely cheesed by them, but perhaps this is simply the developers wanting consistency with Breath of the Wild. Overall, Tears of the Kingdom handles weaknesses and the usefulness of having a variety of equipment and items much better than its predecessor. Outside of new variants, let's discuss the new enemy types added. Much of the combat difficulty in Breath of the Wild depended on large groups of enemies. With the addition of the boss bokoblin, a new layer of combat is added. He can change the behaviour of the bokoblins, whether it's to raise their shields and defend him, or attack the player in unison. He's also just a cool new big enemy to fight, so a decent addition overall. We also get the return of Gibdos. This returning enemy has a strong defense against any non-elemental attacks, taking minimal damage. The only way to defeat them is to use elemental attacks to weaken them, which then allows the player to damage them any way that they wish. This is the exact way I believe elemental enemies should have behaved. However, I do wish that their weakness perhaps should have been limited to just lightning attacks. This would fill the elemental weakness gap, as ice and fire types are weak to each other. We got so close with Gibdos to being perfect, but a weakness to all elements is slightly too much. It's unlikely that a player will not have some level of elemental monster parts of something to fuse to their arrow, even just fire fruit. When I initially believed that it was just lightning that removed their defense, I made more of an effort to keep up stock of items that did lightning damage. Once I realized any element can weaken them, this effort was no longer required, which was a little disappointing. Erakudas are new enemies, roaming the surface as well as the skies. They can often be found carrying enemies or bombs. Having only 2 HP, it's incredibly easy to take them down with a single arrow. While weak enemies aren't an inherent problem, this enemy is disappointing. It's the only enemy that can fly around in the sky, and is barely even a nuisance. Roaming around the skies isn't very dangerous, as these enemies will likely miss you as long as you're continuously moving. In fact, you can probably do nothing, and they might even accidentally kill themselves. Using an Erakuda eyeball to track them will take them down instantly, and will also provide you with another eyeball, so your resources are replenished. The intention of the Erakuda appears to be an enemy that requires you to use ranged attacks, as well as provide an enemy that can attack you while you roam the skies. But unfortunately, their lack of HP makes them too easy to deal with to really shake up the combat that much. Evermeans were an enemy that did take me by surprise. These evil trees will jump to life when you get near them. They require a blade to defeat them, but again, they do have a low HP pool. I wish these were more common on the surface. I would have loved to genuinely be on edge anytime I entered into a forest. But where this enemy does in fact shine is in the depths. They can appear in larger groups, and especially when getting attacked by these living trees in the darkness can cause a bit of panic. This is where I think the low HP enemy is done well, in comparison to the Arakudas especially. This enemy can genuinely take you by surprise, throw you off, and requires a specific weapon type to defeat them. When venturing through caves, you'll come across some new enemy types also, Horriblins and Like-Likes. Much like other common enemies, the Horriblins come in variations that scale in difficulty, and Like-Likes will also have elemental variations. The Horriblins are great additions to the roster of monsters, taking advantage of their habitat in the caves, crawling around on ceilings and throwing rocks at you. They also appropriately give you heavier horns, allowing you to excavate the caves by making weapons out of them. Like-Likes can also often be found inside caves, and these are easily one of my favourite new additions. They come in different elemental forms, including some shielded by rock, and require a different strategy to defeat them compared to other enemies. What's great about this enemy is their use as a supplier of shields. This is a reliable way to get shields, but also a good reference to Like-Likes of the past, which would eat your shields and had to be defeated to get them back, which can still occur in this game. Sometimes Like-Likes won't drop shields and instead something almost completely random, but their shield drop rate is consistent enough that they are a reliable method of restocking. We also have the introduction of the Constructs, robots designed by the Zonai to protect the Sky Islands. You can often find them using various types of weapons, from flamethrowers to rocket arrows. As these enemies have separate allegiance to the typical minions, you may also find them near demon enemies on the surface. You can take advantage of this by taking down the barriers between the two enemy types, pitting them against each other, similar to what you can do with a Muddlebud. And much like the Like-Like, what's great about these constructs is that they're given an individual purpose in the overall gameplay. Defeating constructs rewards you with not only their horns, but also Zonai charges, which can either be consumed to give you temporary energy or traded at a Zonai dispenser. And this is a great design choice, as much like monster parts now being useful for making weapons, the player is more likely to actually drop down onto islands and engage in combat there to earn this reward, rather than just flying all over them. The most powerful enemy in the game is one that hides and can appear out of nowhere to drain you of your life, the Gloomspawn. You may try to run away, but these enemies can quickly catch up to you, and if you fight them, you begin a tough challenge. Patience is not an option. If you spend too long trying to damage them bit by bit at a time, they will respawn over and over and over, forcing you to run and climb and hope they despawn, or face them head on. They'll darken the area around you, making you unable to restore your hearts lost to gloom without having the correct meals or elixirs prepared. Being good at the game really isn't enough for these guys. You can't just stand in a certain spot and parry them to death. You need good equipment and damage. If you do not have enough items to fight them, you will struggle. But if you succeed, the fight may continue, and you may have to go face to face against a Phantom Ganon. Though the variety in enemy roles is certainly much stronger, with each giving you different items and resources for use in various different places, it certainly isn't a rare opinion that the enemy variety itself is a little below what we expected. While there are lots of new enemies, they simply don't show up as much as the standard Bokoblins, Moblins, and Zalfos across both the surface and the depths, which I've just had enough of. The main new common enemy type is Constructs, and they're fine. A good amount of them exist, especially across the sky, but the main issue is that when you get down to the details, they basically have the same gimmick as mini Guardians. Yes, they can wield much more interesting weapons as they can use Zonai devices and fuse, but their main moveset is simple in such a similar way to Guardians from before, where they'll hold a weapon in a direction before they swing. And instead of shooting little beams, they'll have lasers or bows with rockets on them. They're cool, but they're basically a slight tweak and reskin to what we had before that is now removed. Mini Guardians also only existed in shrines, and even then it felt a little repetitive. Now, this replacement also extends to all over the sky and some parts of the surface. There are also new enemies with the tiny health pool, and while Evermeans still manage to have a presence, Arakudas are just so pathetic. The sky does feel like it's missing a real airborne threat, but it's not only the sky that's missing out. It would have been nice if there was a new hard enemy type in each location, like there was with the Gibdos. Development for this game was longer than Breath of the Wild, so I think it's fair to point out the lack of new enemies was a little disappointing. Gibdos in the desert is a great start, but I think we expected a little more, maybe Skulltulas in Farron, Dodongos in Death Mountain, Wolfos in Hebra, Darknuts in Hyrule Castle. There are just too many places in the map that don't have anything new to fight. The caves are given the best treatment by far, with a new common enemy in the Horriblins as well as Like-Likes. Like-Likes are perfect, requiring a different strategy as well as a variety in their attacks and defense among them with the different elemental types, giving you shields. They actually set a standard that feels unmatched across the rest of the map. Guardians were the most important enemy in Breath of the Wild. Not only were they one of the game's mascots, but they were a great progress marker. Taking down a Guardian is a huge moment, making the player feel like they might be strong enough to take down the game's final challenge. Gloom spawns are this game's replacement of the Guardian Stalkers, and there are parts that they do a lot better in, but other parts that they are much weaker in. So let's discuss where they fall behind Guardians. Gloom spawn are rare. There are far fewer of them around the map than Guardians were before, only this time it's in a map that's double the size. There's no doubt that being a rare encounter gives them a much stronger presence. They can pop up at any time, and the player won't know where they can be found until they're attacked. But both this game and the prequel are very forgiving when a player dies. You don't lose a lot and you will spawn somewhere nearby. When losing to a Guardian, you still have them covering a large area that will be tough to get through. But if you lose to a Gloom spawn, you'll know the spot that they pop up and will be able to navigate around them easily, especially with the various new abilities available. Their placement across the map is also very odd. There is only a small handful of times that they'll actually be blocking off something important. In my playthrough where I did all of the shrines and light routes, I only came across them a handful of times, especially in the depths, which would be a terrifying place to come across them. There are 7, with 4 being at the very edges of the map. Despite their rare presence, Gloomspawn are a much more threatening and well-balanced enemy. When it came to Guardians, their difficulty fell off a cliff. Not only were they limited to one attack that could be easily learned and parried, but the rewards you obtained for defeating them let you craft weapons which made them even more of a joke. You'd eventually get to the point where your items would just kill the Guardians for you. Gloomspawn do not give the player that privilege. The weapons dropped by defeating Gloomspawn are no doubt the strongest in the game, but only if Link is strong himself. The bow does damage based on the number of hearts you have, and the melee weapons themselves will take hearts when used. Taking one down early in the game will not turn the rest of the game's combat into a joke, and it certainly doesn't make fighting other Gloomspawn much easier. These enemies remain a threat. Even if the player is great at fighting them, they will use up resources. I just wish they threatened me in a few more places. As much as we can talk about enemy variety and whether it's good enough or not, I have to reiterate the big improvement there is when it comes to enemy rewards. The player can walk into a group of enemies, use a mushroom on a shield to disarm an enemy with a strong weapon, grab it, fuse a horn to it, use whatever tools they wish to take down the group, and walk away with 30 extra arrows, 4 more weapons, a few shields, food, horns, the lot. And all these resources help take down other enemies that might have specific weaknesses to different weapon types, or blunt or sharp weapons. Risk, reward, and engagement when fighting enemies is the strongest it's been in the series, and is easily one of the best improvements this game introduced. Across Hyrule, there are 3 entirely new overworld bosses that can be found: the Flux Construct, Gleeok, and Frogs, mainly found in the sky, surface, and depths respectively. This practically doubles the number of overworld bosses which can be found. The Flux Construct is very unique in how you engage in combat with it. The boss takes on multiple forms, each of which have a number of different ways in which they can be dealt with. It also integrates your different abilities into the fight. For example, when it transforms into a cube, you can either try to hit the boss's weak spot with arrows, or dismantle the construct piece by piece using Ultra Hand. The Frogs isn't anything too special, but it's a good enough boss, combining strategies from Molduga and Talus fights. It's also a nice boss fight that you can only find in the depths, as well as being a good way to earn Zonite. But the Gleeok is my favourite addition by far. Not only is it a very challenging fight, it requires the correct equipment or prep to defeat them, as they affect the weather around them. The problem with the overworld bosses is somewhat derivative of the problem with the new enemy types. In general exploration, the Flux Construct is the only boss you come across in the sky, being fought in the exact same arena each time. Most clusters of Sky Islands will have one flux construct, and it just gets so repetitive and boring. But my bigger issue is the Gleeok. I love this boss, from its various types to its attacks, and it being big enough of a threat to block progress. Everything about it is perfectly designed for Breath of the Wild. Much like the Gloomspawn, they're never really blocking off anything important, and when they are blocking off a path, it's hard to consider it a problem in a game where we can now fly. This game desperately needed more encouragement to travel across the surface rather than the sky, but the Gleeok does the complete opposite. Let's take the Bridge of Hylia for example. It shouldn't have been sitting on the bridge, but flying above it, forcing you to cross the bridge rather than fly past. Tears of the Kingdom is really missing something threatening that discourages you from flying around, and I'm not even going to humour the Aracuda. This should have been Gleeok. Even if it was implemented into the main quests once, like how the Lionel was in Breath of the Wild, it would have been a big improvement. And yet, many of the enemies and bosses are so well integrated. There are certainly missed opportunities in how they would have improved the gameplay loop, but I have to acknowledge how well designed the fights themselves are. There is a lot more fun to be had in the combat this time round, especially in the endgame. It's nice to have more things to fight than just seeing how quickly you can take down a Lionel. Breath of the Wild gave us a simple yet effective gameplay loop. Head to a point of interest, whether it's via a visual interest or a quest objective, and complete shrines, enemy camps, Korok puzzles, and find treasure along the way. The sequel has a similar gameplay loop, yet the expansions to the surface and additional maps add an extra dimension to it. While the upheaval causes much of the kingdom to have changed, one big way Hyrule has been expanded is through caves. Openings in mountains, waterfalls, and many other places contain various different caves with treasure, enemies, and many useful items for you to find. They also contain many Bright Bloom seeds, which are helpful in navigating the depths. There are 147 caves across the map, and as well as often containing their own treasure, each one is given a sense of completion by collecting bubble gems from each of the bubble frogs found within. While having their own new reasons to explore them, caves are also great at concealing shrines. While shrines are easier to find now thanks to the connectivity between maps, which we'll also discuss later, the addition of caves will sometimes force the player to think more three-dimensionally in order to find a shrine. I discussed this in some detail in my previous video where a shrine in the Kiba region required you to think about the inside of a mountain to find a shrine, requiring more thought and exploration. Now this has become a standard of the sequel, where simply knowing a shrine's location is not enough and demands more thought. Caves have often been a classic part of Zelda maps before, so seeing them here being given so much attention to with their variety and purpose in the gameplay is a great choice. Sheikah Towers make a return, but with an additional purpose and expanded ways in which you unlock them. Firstly, unlocking towers no longer requires you to climb to the top every time. Instead, each tower has its own mini-task associated with it. Most of these tasks involve ways to fix the tower, whether that's helping a mechanic to reach it, or going underground to enter the tower from inside in order to unlock a door. These moments really help to make the towers more engaging and unique than before, and is also just a great way to give players something else to do. Where before they were a vantage point that allowed you to view what was around you, as well as unlocking the region map, these towers are more. The first time you use a tower, launching yourself high into the air is such an awesome moment, helping the world to feel that much bigger by letting you see the area from high above. Each tower can launch you into the sky, not only providing a breathtaking view from above, but helps you to reach the Sky Islands. The Sky Islands provide a new type of gameplay, new items to collect, new places to find Koroks, and provide useful views letting you look across the whole kingdom. Containing a fifth of all the Shrines of Light, these beautiful and serene islands feel like a moment of peace in what can be a challenging adventure. One thing that is very different with the Sky Islands is that its gameplay does not revolve around exploration, much like the rest of the game, but focuses more on traversal. These sections mostly require you to figure out ways of getting from island to island, solving puzzles along the way. It reminded me of some of the more linear dungeons from previous entries in the series, where the player has to get from one point to another using the different tools available to them. And I'll continue to argue that these sections are a lot more fun if you only use what is available in the islands rather than pulling Zonai devices out of your inventory. Where the Sky Islands do disappoint is down to both how much there is to do in the sky outside of the main quest sections and how much of it repeats. This is especially the case due to the expectations that the islands had to go up against. Perhaps this is attributed to the marketing, which had a very heavy focus on the sky, though for many, it may be that the Great Sky Island sets up the idea of large new areas to explore that never really reoccur. While yes, the Great Sky Island is also inherently linear, you can still go off track finding many other things to do. Most of the islands are about reaching a singular shrine, but what that entails can remain too similar throughout. We'll talk more about this when we discuss shrines in detail, but it is undoubtedly disappointing to find a new cluster of Sky Islands only to find they're almost the exact same shape as something you've done already. Overall, I think the intention of the Sky Islands to provide more linear and traversal based gameplay is a great idea, and it expands the gameplay loop for this type of Zelda. While there is some repetition, the few that do something different are great fun, and a good break from the standard gameplay found across this game and its predecessor. This is especially the case with the 3 sets of Sky Islands that you traverse during the main quest. Linear puzzle solving sections that get you from A to B have always been in the series, yet were missing in Breath of the Wild, but these new large traversal puzzles were standout moments in my playthrough. From the heights of the sky, you'll be able to see everything on the surface below, but dive into a chasm and there's a lot more that cannot be seen. By far the largest addition to Hyrule is the depths. While a lot of marketing focused on the Sky Islands, the depths themselves were mostly kept secret. I certainly don't think many people expected an entire second map below the surface and equal in size. The concept of the depths is that it acts in the complete opposite to the sky, and also remains dissimilar from the surface. It is a trial of preparedness, navigation, and combat. Even in Breath of the Wild, the idea of height and the openness of the world allowed the player to see everything in front of them, to know what lies ahead, and to scout for anything interesting. This privilege is lost once you descend into a chasm. The Depths, a completely unknown world shrouded in darkness, providing the player with more challenging exploration and various items to help you on your journey. You don't always know what is in front of you, what structures you might find, what enemies lie ahead, and really puts the player's preparedness to the test. Without the right items, food, and even experience, the Depths will punish you. The addition of gloom found all over also expands the area's difficulty and need for prep. One issue I had with the difficulty of Breath of the Wild was how easily food could be abused, meaning it was really difficult to actually die unless you straight up refused to collect food and cook. Even just grabbing apples and mushrooms constantly could supply you with so much food that you'd probably only ever die from a one-shot. Gloom, however, solves this. Hearts can be removed temporarily from either stepping on gloom or being hit by a gloom-soaked enemy. This not only lasts during combat encounters, but will continue on until you return to an area of light or eat a specific type of food. The initial aim of the Depths is to explore through it and light up sections of the map using light routes. These light routes allow you to restore any hearts lost to gloom and also act as fast travel points. Increasing the light in the depths using the light routes also allows the player to further explore that area, including finding various mines and colosseums which provide the player with good rewards. All light routes are connected to a shrine of light on the surface above, solving the problem of how the player can find any shrines that they might be missing on the surface. Even more so than the sky, the Depths has many things that you cannot find anywhere else. From items useful in combat, such as puff shrooms and muddlebuds, there's a large amount of bomb flowers all over the map, and Poes, which are useful in trading for powerful equipment, Zonite to upgrade your energy cell, and even a large amount of treasure. By exploring the sky, you can be given treasure maps that allow you to explore the Depths for really cool gear and equipment, including classic Zelda outfits that were previously locked behind amiibo. And one of the best aspects is that the Depths provide something which is much needed. Scattered all over the Depths are the spirits of soldiers, holding weapons untainted by gloom. This was an incredible design choice, as it really cements the improvement on the weapon system that is brought in by Fuse. As long as you take periodic trips into the Depths, you'll easily be able to refill your inventory with weapons that you can then upgrade using Fuse. These weapons are also well balanced, as the stronger weapons can be found in the more difficult sections. While there is so much to do in the Depths and many upgrades to be found, I still agree that, especially on an aesthetic level, in terms of its limits in background tracks and repetitive visuals throughout, it can be less exciting for the player to keep exploring. This is an issue I believe the shrines also had in Breath of the Wild, where you spend so much time in places that look the same with the same music. Especially so here, as you could easily spend more time in the depths than you would in the shrines. This isn't an area designed to have many points of interest to explore and discover, but instead acts as a more intermittent change to the gameplay, expanding this loop to provide you with more equipment, items, and upgrades for your adventure, as well as creating an alternate challenge. I strongly believe, especially in concept, that the depths are the greatest addition in Tears of the Kingdom. In my previous video, I mentioned something that I like to call the small key philosophy, an aspect of traditional dungeons that I didn't think needed to be limited to dungeons themselves, but could be applied to the entire map. This philosophy is the idea of interconnectivity between areas. While in a dungeon a small key can help unlock a separate part of the dungeon and help you progress, I believe this to be something that could have also have been applied to the overworld. Items that you may find in certain regions should help you in a different one. Something that genuinely impressed me was how this was implemented in Tears of the Kingdom in multiple ways, making exploration for the player feel so much more interconnected. The most significant example of this is the connection between the surface, the sky, and the depths. In all regions, you can find multiple items that will help you further your exploration within others. For example, items which can help you heal from gloom, such as Sundylines, are found within the skies. You can also find maps in the sky that will point you to treasures to earn cool equipment in the depths. On the flip side, the depths are where you can collect Zonite and increase the size of your energy cell. While an increased energy cell is useful across the entire game, it also has significant use when traversing the Sky Islands, especially when you need to transport light crystals between them. Furthermore, the depths are where you can easily find and restock on the strongest weapons, and this idea also exists with the caves on the surface. There are an abundance of Bright Bloom seeds, helpful in navigating the darkness of the depths, as well as being able to fight like-likes to earn shields. With the addition of 2 new maps to the world of Hyrule comes a significant change to the loop of gameplay and a much needed sense of connectivity through items and upgrades that brings the whole game together. And while on paper this system is perfect, and more than what I was hoping for, the problem mainly lies in how useful the depths actually are and the systems in the game that allow you to avoid them entirely. Zonite is the main resource to find there, but is it really as useful as it should be? The 2 main uses of Zonite are to upgrade your energy cell and use auto build. There is a limit to how much you need to upgrade your cell, so eventually that stops being a reason to earn Zonite, especially if you consider you can earn batteries from dispensers to keep your machines running, or use up a Zonite charge to minimize your cell depletion. In terms of auto build, this can also be circumvented by having devices you need in your inventory, stopping it from costing anything at all. So, unfortunately, the existence of Zonite charges in the sky mitigates the usefulness of getting Zonite in the depths. Even if you do explore the depths, any actual challenge or engagement is lost when using Zonite devices. It's very easy to fly from light route to light route, stopping the player from needing to explore and find things of use. And while it's great that there is so much treasure to find in the depths, a lot of this is really cosmetic. If you limit or even get rid of the Zonite dispensers, this issue starts to solve itself. It is unfortunate that these systems don't work perfectly, but the ideas that are there are something to give credit for. You can easily get used to how connected this world is, yet it's far beyond what we expected before the game was released. There were many discussions online about how connected the sky would be to the surface, and the ease of transition between both was surprising to many. Not only that, but we had no idea we could stand in the skies of Hyrule and dive straight beneath the surface into the depths below. Whether or not the skies and depths are perfect, their addition having no impact on the fluid connectivity of this world is something to still be impressed by. And across the maps, there are so many things to find and collect in order to earn upgrades. Across the surface and the sky, you will also find the return of Korok seeds. You may find a number of Korok seeds in some of the same spots as Breath of the Wild, especially at important landmarks, While it might seem as just a reuse of content, this works well, allowing you to get some easy Korok seeds from memory, but also prevents spots that should be obvious Korok seeds from no longer having them. This would be especially useful for players coming into Tears of the Kingdom without playing its predecessor. Most Korok seeds are found in entirely new places, and many of them even incorporate new types of puzzles. A new way to earn 200 of the Korok seeds is in the form of helping a Korok reach his friend. This definitely starts out as something really cool. Use the resources around you or resources that you have stored to transport a Korok to their desired location, providing you with 2 Korok seeds. It works especially well when you're given the materials around you to transport the Korok, such as wheels and platforms, but unlike normal Korok puzzles, these Koroks can take you completely off your track, sometimes sending you back the way you came, which can be more irritating than difficult. This is especially the case when you're not given resources to transport the Korok and get back. Some Korok seeds can actually be found in the Sky Islands, and this opens up the possibility to be able to search for Korok seeds in entirely new areas. There are 61 total seeds to find in the sky, though just under a third of them are found on the Great Sky Island. I do think this is somewhat lost potential, though this is a part of the consequence of the sky not having as many islands to just explore. We also see the return of shrines. These are called Shrines of Light, which allow Link to remove some of the gloom that infected his arm each time and return his strength. These work exactly the same as they did in Breath of the Wild, providing you with an upgrade to your hearts or stamina wheel after completing 4 of them. When I initially started the shrines, I looked at them from the perspective of how Breath of the Wild's shrines work, with many of the shrines focusing on using one of your 4 abilities in a certain way. After a good number of shrines, I felt disappointed that each of the shrines were Ultra Hand shrines. But after a while, you'll likely realise that this isn't exactly the case at all. Ultra Hand is less of a specific ability to use for puzzles, like how bombs or stasis were, but it's simply this game's way to interact with and move the objects around you. One comparison you could make would be using a touchscreen to solve puzzles, but with an additional degree of freedom. Therefore, most of the shrines are instead dedicated to the objects that you find within them. This was sometimes the case with Breath of the Wild, such as a shrine that focuses on transporting a flame or dealing with a specific obstacle. But the Shrines of Light take this into account for almost every shrine, where the puzzles are dedicated to a Zonai device, object, or obstacle, with no forced way to interact with it. Through Fuse and Ultra Hand, I almost felt like I could make my own Zelda items based on what I needed for that shrine. This doesn't mean all of them are perfect. There are multiple shrines that will include the same puzzles, such as using a glider to reach the end point or creating bridges with Ultra Hand, but the majority of shrines have more than enough individuality. Firstly, a clear improvement can be seen in the combat shrines. Rather than forcing you to fight against the same guardian over and over, combat shrines now challenge you to fight a group of constructs, with each one being in a different arena, giving you different items to work with. You'll start each combat shrine with Link's equipment removed, meaning each one can be enjoyable and unique irrespective of how far in the game you are. Many of the shrines work by providing you with an item or device which all the puzzles will revolve around. One example I could talk about is the shrine that builds puzzles around the Zonai stabilizers. Though the player might have used these before, they're never required for any other shrine or dungeon. By focusing this shrine around this single device, the player has to figure out exactly how they work and how they can be used. After the shrine, I began using this device more often to hold large constructions upright and sometimes as a way to cross large gaps. Outside of devices, there are a number of shrines with great concepts, such as one with a giant Jenga tower or one where you can rotate an entire tower and attempt to ascend through. Due to the freedom you have with Link's new abilities, there are multiple ways that you could end up tackling a puzzle, and coming up with your own solution can be even more satisfying than it was in Breath of the Wild. There will likely be 1 or 2 puzzles that you tackle in ways others did not. One example of mine is from the Fire and Ice Shrine, requiring you to use an ice cube to hold down a large button. I've seen multiple solutions to solving this puzzle, both in person and from various clips, that I could not have ever thought of. But what really stood out in the shrines was the ways you could use recall. Very few of these mini-dungeons truly require you to use this ability, yet in almost every one, I thought about how I could use recall intentional or not. Sometimes this would be simple things such as having a lever turn automatically or a floating platform for easy traversal. But my favourite example of this had to be in one shrine where an orb is launched to the other side, requiring you to traverse across the sand to get the orb and return back. As soon as I gained control, I activated recall and attempted to reverse the orb all the way back, removing the need for me to traverse at all and instantly solve this section of the shrine. I can honestly say this was one of the most satisfying things I'd done in a shrine. It's difficult to really discuss whether the shrines have been significantly improved from the previous set. Both have weaker shrines, fun and unique shrines, as well as a few very challenging ones. Yet in a game that works to give the player as much freedom as possible, with abilities that allow you to manipulate so much around you, it's incredibly impressive that the developers have still managed to create puzzles that can really engage and challenge the player. Where I do think Tears of the Kingdom falls behind is the shrine quests. An entire section of my critique on the prequel discussed the shrine quests and how great some of them were, which sometimes used your overall knowledge of the world around you to solve a puzzle rather than acting as a simple puzzle in isolation. Firstly, any shrine quest that requires you to fight an overworld boss in Tears of the Kingdom will rarely ever have you fight the new ones. Sometimes you might need to fight a flux construct, but Gleeok and Phrox go completely untouched. Secondly, most of the shrine quests require you to get a crystal from point A to B. These quests are fine the first time around, but there are so many of them, and most of them just require you to attach a crystal to a glider and fly over. And finally, while there are some shrine quests that involve riddles and overworld puzzles, I'd say the word some is almost generous. I do have a feeling of missing Cass. While of course many of us miss the actual character himself, what I mainly miss is what he provided for the gameplay. He worked in so many ways, music that you could hear from a distance, letting the player know a quest was nearby, providing you with a riddle that you must solve in order to unlock the shrine. While he only provided 8 quests, these were the highlights of finding shrines in Breath of the Wild. While there are a few examples of this in Tears of the Kingdom, there really are not that many. The Keysborn of Water quest is one example, where the player has to figure out that they need to make keys that fit the holes by creating ice blocks, and have to use their equipment to make blocks of the correct size. While the quests given by the construct act in the same way as Cass's quests, they are not as easy to find, and much of the charm is unfortunately lost. I really wanted more deer puzzles. How shrines reward the player has made a substantial improvement to the gameplay, which is done by giving the player less rewards. This may seem strange, but for the balance of the overall game, this change was completely necessary. Breath of the Wild's strongest weapons were found randomly in shrines. This really disrupted the flow of the game. Why use a weapon if you know you can usually only replace it by hopefully coming across one in a shrine chest? The alternative was to remember respawn points of certain weapons, which are rarely the best and certainly a tedious task for the average player. The longer shrine quests with the better rewards are now replaced by side adventures, side quests, and caves. This helps separate the shrines and makes it better for the player to know what activity to pursue to get what kind of reward. And the addition of these side adventures should not be overlooked. Side quests and side adventures are not just a structure change to the side quests, but an entirely different and additional set of side content. Breath of the Wild had 90 side quests total in the game, and Tears of the Kingdom has 139 side quests as well as 60 side adventures. For side adventures, rewards are more significant and often enough feel like they add to the overall story. By interacting with these additional tasks, you get to see how the upheaval has affected the people of Hyrule. One of my biggest gripes with Breath of the Wild was how easy it was to find ore and how it sold for so much, as well as having no alternative use. I stated that I wanted ore to either be rarer, cheaper, or be useful in crafting. And somehow, I got all my wishes at once. And thanks to the changes made to ore, which sell for less and are now useful in crafting, it is much more worthwhile to take on side quests and side adventures to earn rupees. One thing I absolutely loved that they expanded on through the side adventures is the Yiga clan. Their presence around Hyrule has so much more impact. They are no longer limited to just the Yiga hideout in Gerudo Desert and popping up now and then to attack you. but exist across Hyrule causing havoc. Whether it's having multiple secret hideouts where they've kidnapped Hateno villagers to design their outfits, or fortresses they've built within the depths, the Yiga feel more like another threat that Link has to deal with. What's especially great is the Yiga being capable of using Zonai tech. Having to deal with their use of Zonai tech in their various forts adds a new spin to the gameplay and appropriately rewards you with schematics for new tech designs. Collecting pieces of the Yiga's outfit also allows you to infiltrate certain hideouts and help you unlock additional rewards. Master Koga is also given a more significant role in this game. You can find him early on at the Great Abandoned Central Mine after unlocking Auto Build. You'll have to fight him using his vehicles, which upgrade during the fight. After this, there are 3 additional encounters with him should the player decide to chase him through the depths. You are not given exact markers of where to find him, but instead a general direction. Through clues from the overworld map and following the various statues leading to these mines, you can track him. With each fight, you are given some crystallized charges and a useful schematic. Not only is this side adventure fun and highly rewarding, but provides an additional purpose to exploring the depths. Though this can be tackled at any time, you're encouraged to find him later on in the game. Integrating these side adventures into the main adventure and its story, the player's more likely to engage with the wider content available, as well as providing different ways to play through the game on repeat playthroughs. After playing Breath of the Wild for so long and spending so much time trying to figure out every detail, I kept coming to the same conclusion. Breath of the Wild's only real flaw was in its balancing. This applied to many things, such as rupees, weapon durability, how difficulty was handled, what rewards you earned for doing what activity, and how these things connect the world together. In almost every one of these aspects, Tears of the Kingdom hits the nail on the head. Whether it's enemy drops, ore, shrine rewards, quest rewards, caves, everything feels so much more carefully balanced, with every activity having its own unique role and reward within the game. Tears of the Kingdom's musical direction remains mostly the same as before, containing ambient music while exploring, but this sequel includes a series of new tracks that help to create a more dynamic world. Returning tracks are often used in this game to bring about a sense of comfort and familiarity, such as the fields of Hyrule and stables, but any dangerous location is usually met with an unfamiliar track, including returning places such as Hyrule Castle. For both the part of the castle raised into the sky and the part still intact on the surface, a new rendition of the castle theme plays, that while containing melodic parts from the original track, still manages to create tension through music that is dissimilar as you explore a castle torn from where it once stood. The same music direction exists within the villages. After the events of the upheaval, as you arrive at each village, afflicted by different phenomena, the music, while keeping the original melodies, is often eerier and sounds distressed. It's not until you save the village that the familiar music plays once again. An assortment of different tracks come along throughout the entire main quest, providing a lot more variety than before, whether it's during the main quest, throughout the dungeons, boss fights, and especially cutscenes. Among other tracks lie a series of references that are not only cool to find, but once noticed, add to the storytelling itself. A standout example is the theme of the Light Dragon. This track is different to that which plays when near the other 3 dragons. You're unlikely to notice it before you know the identity of the Light Dragon, but the melody actually begins with the first 2 notes of Zelda's lullaby, before changing to the melody of the dragons, as if the memory of the lullaby has mostly been forgotten. There are other places that hide this iconic melody, such as the Temple of Time theme, which hides answers to the game's mysteries in plain sight. My personal favourite reference is Ganondorf's new theme, being taken from the track of the final level at Death Mountain from the original Zelda. There are so many tracks that I could go on for hours, and I expect this soundtrack to be a favourite of mine for years to come. We've talked enough about the world of Hyrule and the various changes that come with the upheaval. It's time we talk about the main adventure of Tears of the Kingdom. The story of Tears of the Kingdom follows Link as he attempts to save the kingdom from the effects of the upheaval, learn the secrets of Hyrule's ancient history, and recruit a new group of sages to help in the fight against the Demon King. Each mainline quest is based on saving the main villages from devastation, working alongside one of the descendants of the sages. While the prequel did have main quests where you had to save the 4 villages from divine beasts, they were a minor part of the overall gameplay, with more focus put on exploration. Unfortunately, the exploration was not really necessary, as main quests, dungeons and bosses were easy enough to access and complete at any point. Main quests outside of the Gerudo section felt like an afterthought. Tears of the Kingdom puts a lot more effort into its main quests, with each one having a sense of individuality. Replaying this game, I could get satisfaction by just completing all the dungeons. Each of the main quests contain multiple different tasks that must be completed to be able to access the area's temple. Many of these quests felt like old school Zelda, reminding me of the best parts of Ocarina of Time. One example of this would be the Zora questline. This quest contains a few tasks, including a fetch quest to fix the Zora armor, finding the king, solving a riddle, fighting a mini-boss, and completing a mini-dungeon before navigating a series of linear sky islands to reach the temple. This is 5 times the content of what was found in Breath of the Wild's Zora quest, and took me completely by surprise. The fact that after each challenge, a new one popped up left me continually engaged, and made reaching the water temple feel like an actual reward. Puzzles like the riddle, which require you to not only find the correct area, but figure out a solution once there, is a staple of the Zelda series. The fact that there were multiple examples of this across Tears of the Kingdom felt like a return to form, but also a step forward for this new type of Zelda game. The constant hand-holding and map markers are no longer here to ruin these riddles, making completion of these challenges that much more satisfying. Having to complete these tasks to progress adds more linearity to the main quest, which not only helps to ensure the quest is longer, but also allows for greater replayability. Not only do these quests have more depth, but each one of them boasts variety. The Gerudo questline is much more combat focused, having you take down waves of Gibdos. It even includes a section reminiscent of tower defense games, where you get to station different Gerudo at different parts of the town. This was one of those moments that I would replay the game just to experience it again. After the tower defense section, there is another riddle that must be solved within the overworld in order to raise the lightning temple from the ground. The Goron quest starts by trying to find Yonobo after finding out he's the one providing the marbled rock roast. Once you've found him, you have a very short boss fight against him, and after bringing him back to his senses, you head to the top of Death Mountain to face another pretty cool mini-boss. This mini-boss, irrespective of how difficult it is, works well simply because it does something different. While this is reminiscent of attacking the divine beasts, it's just a small part of the overall quest. Flying around the top of a volcano and launching Yonobo at a 3-headed dragon feels a lot more fun than just bringing down a divine beast for the 4th time. And you can't complain about actually being able to jump into Death Mountain to access the depths beneath it. Furthermore, getting to Gorondia in the depths stands out among the 4 quests, as it's made a lot easier by exploring the depths and activating nearby light routes. I do think they could have taken this idea further. Once you reach the temple, it is entirely lit up. It would have been quite cool if the dungeon became more visible the more light routes you activated in the surrounding area. While the Rita quest is arguably the simplest one, it's still a strong enough quest, especially with how incredible the climb to the Wind Temple is. Comparing this to the Rita quest from Breath of the Wild, it's clear that a lot more time and effort has been put into them. In fact, the quality of the mainline quest from Breath of the Wild is matched by Tears of the Kingdom's side adventures alone. The sequel's mainline quests feel like an entirely new tier. Open world games can often run into the problem of a player being highly skilled or overly powered, limiting the engagement in its main story. But the main story of Tears of the Kingdom provides so many different challenges, which remain fun irrespective of your skill or equipment, that can engage the player at any point in the game, and even on repeat playthroughs. From mini-bosses to riddles, fetch quests, tower defense sections, mini-dungeons, these quests are reminiscent of traditional Zelda games, where each main quest has its own identifiable tasks and set pieces. This not only makes for a constantly engaging game, but also allows the game to feel larger. Tears of the Kingdom gave players a mainline adventure of such grandeur, which the Hyrule that was introduced to us so many years ago deserved. When I started writing my Breath of the Wild video, the main point that I started from was trying to focus on why the dungeons in Breath of the Wild couldn't be compared to the dungeons found in previous entries. Older games had most of their content in the main quests and dungeons, which isn't necessarily the case for the new era of Zelda games. Much like the original Zelda, the majority of the content is found in the exploration between main quests, thus we can't really expect dungeons to be exactly the same as they were before. I went into depth about how Breath of the Wild incorporated the key ingredients of a Zelda dungeon into its overworld. Despite this, there is no doubt that players wanted to see an improvement to dungeons in this sequel. A way in which they add more traditional style of gameplay are linear sections that connect the open world to the dungeon. Before reaching the temples, you'll first have to make your way through one of these linear sections. This is done through a series of sky islands in the Rito, Zora and Zonai quest, a series of tunnels in the Lightning Temple, and a section of the depths for the Goron quest. Where in Breath of the Wild the dungeons only had their open sections, with puzzles which can be done in any order, Tears of the Kingdom is able to bring back the linear style dungeon gameplay. Not by having some dungeons be linear and some not, but by adding these sections to the beginning of every one. This allows a puzzle solving challenge of getting from A to B, as well as an open puzzle solving area, to both be a part of the dungeons. Each linear section is designed incredibly well. They are long enough to satisfy the need for linear parts of Zelda, but do not overstay their welcome. They can introduce new items and ideas to the player, which not only make them more engaging, but allow the player to get to understand these new gameplay ideas so that they can prepare for the more difficult puzzles in the temple ahead. There are also shrines along the way which deal with different obstacles and Zono devices that the player will be using. Moments from these linear sections were a large highlight of the game for me. This was especially the case on the Sky Island sections that connect the surface to a temple in the skies above. The continuous progression as you climb higher into the sky, completing puzzles along the way, kept me continuously thrilled. Even these linear islands boast individuality between them, such as the Zora Islands which have bubbles that transport you around, as well as a weaker gravity. Jumping, climbing waterfalls, and swimming in floating bubbles is just a part of the dungeon. The Rito Islands also have their own style, with large pillars to ascend through, ice sheets that need to be broken, and sails you can jump from. The developers did more with these sections than just create linear challenges to improve the dungeons. These moments are cinematic, building up tension to give a grand entrance to the temple you're about to enter. Climbing high into the sky, jumping off sails of flying ships, until you reach high enough that you can skydive into the mouth of a storm raging above Hebra. Just entering this dungeon creates a moment that I will not forget. Tears of the Kingdom brings back Breath of the Wild's Divine Beast-style dungeons in the form of 5 temples, yet there are some very significant upgrades here. The Wind Temple is likely to be the first temple that you will complete, as this is where the game encourages you to go. Despite being able to ascend, climb the walls, and even fly around, the layout of the dungeon still demands some level of searching for the terminals, at least much more than what was required in the Divine Beasts. This was something refreshing to see. It allows for the dungeons to feel more than just like a few shrines that were stuck together. That's not to say that the Divine Beasts never had terminals that were hard to reach, but the structures of the new temples are much less obvious. The change to a 2D map is immediately felt. The player has to connect these floors together in their head and almost plan their route to find entry points. You can also tackle this dungeon by just trying to explore it, rather than taking a planned and linear approach, discovering terminals along the way. Most terminals will be found down corridors that require you to either create levers or break ice in order to progress. The puzzles here are some of the simplest across the dungeons, but still manage to create challenge through its demand for exploration. The puzzles of the Water Temple are definitely a step up. While the Wind Temple focuses more on getting through corridors, the Water Temple has various puzzles that make you stand and think. This temple has 2 small puzzles that really stood out. One was simply placing an orb inside of a hole, something that we've had to do many times. The player has to figure out a way to keep the orb in place, with the most obvious solution being using the floating platforms as a plug. Another example is having to conduct electricity to open a door. The first step is to create a water wheel, balancing the paddles to keep it spinning. Then the conductivity needs to be extended to the door, but there is a gap. This is another time where you'll have to use a Zonai device differently to how you used it before. Rather than a mode of transport, you can use the Zonai bubbles to conduct electricity through it. While the puzzles of this temple have more depth to them, I found that the layout was a little simpler than the others. Every puzzle can be accessed directly from the center point, bar perhaps the one underneath. While I understand this dungeon is definitely intended to be a puzzle-focused one rather than layout-focused, it's definitely a bit of a shame, as doing both would have made it perfect. The Lightning Temple is one I believe to be one of the stronger dungeons in this game. It opens with the linear section, replacing the Sky Island sections we've seen in the previous temples. This section forces you to deal with more Gibdos, and teaches you to tackle some of the more dungeon-specific things, including using mirrors, removing loose stones, and clearing out sand. Outside of the other two dungeons, this section felt a lot more like some sections of traditional dungeons, as you can't use multiple traversal tools to get through this area, with the completion of puzzles being necessary in order to move forward. This area is a long corridor of puzzles and traps that must be played through. Once you get to the main room of the dungeon, you'll now have to start looking for terminals. And this is one of the best examples of how these temples improve upon the divine beasts. While yes, there are still terminals that you need to complete, the dungeon as a whole is its own puzzle. In order to reach the final terminals, the player has to use different items to manipulate the light on all levels of the temple. As you complete different sections of the temple, they can be used to move different mirrors and statues to help make progress on the overall puzzle. While this temple does fall back to oversimplified terminals that feel pushed in, such as the one at the back of the temple where you just remove a few blocks, the fact that these types of terminals are no longer the entire dungeon is a huge step forward. Finally, the Fire Temple. This dungeon is one I'm very interested to talk about. Out of all of the dungeons, this is the one that I've seen the most mixed opinions on. A lot of the negative opinions on this dungeon appear to come down to frustration. While a lot of the puzzles employ simple concepts previously seen and don't require too much figuring out from the player, the navigation of the dungeon itself is the most complicated by far, in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Finding the terminals themselves is much harder than figuring out their puzzles. Quite appropriately, the Fire Temple is the opposite of the Water Temple in this way. By using various rail tracks, the player is required to work their way up the dungeon, completing puzzles as they go through. And sometimes this will require you to pull out your map, figure out where you need to go and how to get there. This reminded me a lot of some of the older maze-style dungeons, especially some of the ones in Ocarina of Time, though much shorter. In this way, this dungeon is the most like a classic dungeon we have seen across these two games. For a lot of players, especially those who may have not played older Zelda games and experienced their more grueling dungeons, the Fire Temple's complex layout may be somewhat overwhelming. Without really accepting that navigation is the main puzzle of this dungeon, I can see where this may be irritating. In my Breath of the Wild video, I previously discussed that I truly believed that dungeons which focus on a complex layout that you have to learn often have a greater replayability. It's much easier to remember a satisfying solution to a puzzle than it is to remember how to find your way through a maze. When returning to Tears of the Kingdom for the first time, the Fire Temple was the only one that I didn't complete in half the time it originally took me. Of course, this is not traditional Zelda. Despite having a complex layout, the dungeon is entirely open. The majority of the Fire Temple can be cheated by using various Zonai devices, such as rockets and hovercrafts, to ignore the rail system and fly to your destination. Still, for me, the Fire Temple was an enjoyable challenge. The complex layouts of Zelda dungeons is something I thoroughly missed. While the Divine Beasts sometimes shared puzzles with earlier shrines, even tutorial shrines, that made a lot of their puzzles seem trivial, Tears of the Kingdom's temples usually bear more originality in their dungeons. Though a new downside is the shrines that lead up to the temples. Most of the shrines which can be found on the path towards a temple will often contain simpler versions of the puzzles that are found within the temples, and can make them a bit easier and less satisfying to complete. Puzzles are often laid out in the shrines in a way that makes the solution more obvious. Solving a puzzle in isolation in one of these shrines definitely leaves less room for confusion. Yet, overall, the improvements in this new era dungeon format are very significant, with variations in its designs, its themes, bosses and puzzles. Each has a level of individuality that was previously missing. Most also have Zonai devices that you'll likely come across for the first time here, such as mirrors or fire hydrants. Using the sage's abilities and making your own dungeon items from Zonai devices, the puzzles are able to stand out not just from the other dungeons, but from the whole game. I will say it's a shame that they couldn't combine aspects of certain dungeons together. The Water Temple had some really good puzzles, one or two that made me rack my brain for a while, but the layout of the dungeon just felt overly simplistic. If a dungeon had the layout of something like that found in the Fire Temple, and also had the more complex puzzles of the Water Temple, then you'd have something far more challenging and satisfying, more akin to the traditional Zelda dungeons. And personally, I would love that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what this game needed. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are about so much more than the mainline quests and dungeons, and for many players will only be a fraction of the total playtime. And yet, the fact that we can even begin to compare Tears of the Kingdom's mainline quests and dungeons to other entries in the series that do entirely focus on them is impressive. Each of the 4 dungeons are able to satisfy a different itch. You're no longer doing 4 dungeons that use the same 4 Sheikah runes to solve puzzles you've already seen in rooms next to each other. These are much larger and expansive trials, first needing to be reached by traversing through a large series of islands or across parts of the depths, and once you've arrived, the dungeon continues, with a more open set of trials, where getting from puzzle to puzzle can be a challenge itself, giving you items you may not have used before to complete them. This game proved to me that the Divine Beasts were not a problem conceptually, and could be expanded into dungeons worthy of tying up each quest. After completing the 4 main dungeons, a puppet of Zelda beckons you to the castle. Using your abilities to travel through the sky, you must head to the castle to meet her. As you chase her through the castle, you are forced to venture and make your way around this labyrinth of passages and take down waves of enemies along the way. This acts kind of like a mini dungeon, but focuses on combat. I felt that this was something that was really missing from Breath of the Wild, so forcing you not only to defeat many enemies, but also to actually go through most of the castle was not something I expected at all, and a very welcome addition. After returning from Hyrule Castle, a discussion with Purah leads you into one more quest, to find the 5th Sage. While this additional sage is hinted at throughout the game, a more linear approach may lead some players to be surprised by the additional dungeon. Out of all of the main quests, this is arguably the strongest. You start by having to figure out for yourself where to go to find out about the 5th Sage. You'll either have to use knowledge of a place you've previously explored, or try and figure it out for yourself. For those who have been to Kakariko beforehand, you might already suspect that you can now explore the ruins, but for some players, figuring out that you need to go to Kakariko may be more of a challenge. After a short task at Kakariko, you have to head to the Zonai ruins and solve a puzzle that requires you to provide offerings at statues of dragon heads. Not only was this a cool quest, but providing context to these ruins, the only area named after the Zonai in Breath of the Wild, was incredibly satisfying. While the Sky Islands above Faron are always accessible, the Stormhead clouds your vision. This is a really great way that the developers incorporated linearity into the game. You can access these islands at any point, but it's only by completing this quest and using the dragon heads in Faron's region will the storm cloud be gone and make it easier to complete. Just like the other 2 sets of islands in the Zora and Rito quests, these islands are great to traverse, incorporating their own types of puzzles, needing you to use the lightning storm and conduct electricity to different parts. Once you've completed this trial in the sky, you'll be led into the depths to tackle one final dungeon. This dungeon consists of 4 small puzzle segments, each containing a part to build Mineru's construct. Much like the Fire Temple, getting to each one of these 4 depots is made easier by having already activated the light routes in this part of the depths. If you haven't already activated these light routes, 1 or 2 of them can actually be a bit out of the way. And this is a good way to reward the player for exploring outside of the main quests. Each part of the factory is dedicated to using a different Zonai device to transport the pieces of the construct around. While most of the devices are things the player is likely to be very well versed with at this stage of the game, this dungeon manages to still create interesting puzzles with them. The unique aspect of this dungeon is that rather than accessing terminals, you have to transport these pieces through different segments back to a point. This includes one where you have to attach it to some rails and allow it to move along without it being hindered, but also remain balanced. A similar puzzle requires you to use wheels to move a piece along a pillar, again needing to be particular in how you balance it. There's also a part of this dungeon where they really show off how good the physics engine is, where a chain can wrap around a wheel in order to lift a door. While the dungeon doesn't provide you with anything too unique, using Zonai devices the player has probably used many times during the game works well as a final test. This quest to find the 5th Sage really does pull out all of the stops. you're required to figure out where to start for yourself, solve a riddle in the ruins of Faron, traverse a series of sky islands, and complete a dungeon found within the depths. This is a perfect example of how this sequel really improves on its main content, using the world of Hyrule not just as an area for exploration, but as a place to incorporate level design. At the end of each temple lies a boss fight that references old Zelda bosses and enemies. Unlike the Blights, each has their own individual gameplay, aesthetics, and music. From their individuality alone, they are a vast improvement on the Blight Ganon fights from the prequel. Firstly, there are fights that are more gimmicky, stepping away from the regular combat. Colgera takes place entirely in the air, requiring you to fly around to avoid attacks, and dive towards the boss to attack them. With there being such an emphasis in this game on skydiving, actually getting to fight a boss entirely in the air is awesome. There is also the fight against the Seized Construct, which makes you take control of Mineru's construct, engaging in a boxing match within the depths. Despite being almost gimmicky, this boss manages to create some challenge without being irritating to fight. The other bosses use the standard combat on foot, but still manage to have a good level of individuality. Muktarok is one of the weaker boss fights in this game, and doesn't incorporate enough of a gimmick to be fun, nor a challenge that requires skill. He can be tricky to get a hold of, especially through all of the muck, but most of its attacks are easy to avoid. This is especially the case with the anti-gravity environment in the temple, making the attacks even easier to dodge than they usually would be. The boss has an attack where it shoots a beam in an arc. This attack would have been great if it actually required you to use Sidon's ability as a shield against it, but because of the anti-gravity environment, you can jump over this attack quite easily. Marble Goma, on the other hand, is a more decent fight. I definitely give it points for its use of the Sage ability. Yonobo is useful not just as a way to stagger this boss, leaving them open for attack, but it's also helpful in avoiding certain attacks that Goma can do. When surrounded by explosive rocks, having Yonobo on hand allows you to break through them and escape with ease. This boss isn't too much of a challenge, but it should be given points for doing something different, and being easier if you take advantage of the Sage ability. Queen Gibdo is a standout fight. Its specific weakness to elements means that you either have to come into the fight stocked up, or use Riju's lightning ability, which is a lot more difficult to manage. The various attacks that it has can be some of the most difficult to avoid, and depending on when you take on this boss, can do a pretty big chunk of damage. Not only that, but this boss can spawn Gibdos, making the fight that much more challenging. Both this game and its prequel scale combat difficulty usually by having a large number of enemies to deal with. This seems to be understood well in this boss, as well as some of the other fights such as Phantom Ganon. Dealing with a tough enemy while having to increase your mental stack with other enemies around you genuinely works well to improve the challenge of these fights. A great design choice for the bosses is the new way that they handle scaling. Now, this can get technical, so do forgive me. Firstly, let's summarize how attack power and defense works. Each point of attack power from a boss is equivalent to 1/4 of a heart, so an attack power of 4 would be equal to 1 heart. Defense of the player's armor works as a subtraction to the attack, so if you're attacked by something with a power of 12 but have a defense of 4, you will take 8 points of damage, or 2 hearts instead of 3 hearts. The fight against the Blights in Breath of the Wild would scale based on how many had been previously defeated. Their attacks will add damage depending on order, adding an additional 2 points of damage or a half heart for each Blight you've defeated. So the max addition is 6 points. If a Blight does an attack that deals 4 hearts of damage if you fight them first, the same attack will do 5.5 hearts of damage if they are fought last. This is no longer the case in Tears of the Kingdom. Instead of a fixed addition to the damage points, attacks are increased by a scalar. Therefore, bosses can do 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, or even 3 times the damage depending on which order you fight them in. Let's use an example. In Breath of the Wild, if Windblight Ganon has an attack that deals 4 hearts of damage if you fight them first, the attack will do 5.5 hearts of damage if you fight them fourth. You'd need an additional defense of 6 to counter this increase. In Tears of the Kingdom, if Queen Gibdo also has an attack that will do 4 hearts of damage when fighting them first, this same attack can do 10 hearts of damage if you fight them fourth. You'd need a defense of 24 to counter this. This change is significant and something I was looking for in Breath of the Wild. The bosses could be completed with minimal upgrades to your defense and the number of hearts due to small fixed increases in damage, meaning the player does not have to explore in order to continue the main quest. Tears of the Kingdom's bosses are much more likely to punish you for not upgrading as you progress through the game. This makes Great Fairies a lot more worthwhile and helps increase the replayability. But scaling isn't the main reason why these fights are a step forward. Zelda bosses in the past have never really been that difficult. Some can be tricky in figuring out what you have to do, but the majority of them are simple once their weakness is discovered, often using the dungeon's main item. Tears of the Kingdom's bosses are almost a return to form, with each one having a weakness related to the quest that has led up to it. My point being, while these bosses aren't always the most challenging fights, they all feel a lot more like Zelda bosses. There have been great improvements in their design, music, individuality, and narrative, having a direct impact on the villages they reside near. While the cut-and-paste story of the Divine Beasts felt less personal to each village, there is something much more heroic when taking down Tears of the Kingdom's bosses. Whether it's to stop the monster creating a storm that is starving a village, or a large insect that is infecting the desert, taking them on alongside the sage actually feels like you are fighting to save the people of that land. Most of the tracks for the bosses contain music with references to either the village or the sages, whether it's the Queen Gibzo track playing a twisted version of the Gerudo Town theme, or Muktarok's theme hiding a riff beneath its rising notes found in both Mipha and Sidon's themes. My personal favourite example of this has to be Colgera. The battle takes place in the middle of a storm that covers the skies of Rito Village. The music playing in the background builds in the same way it did as you climbed towards the eye of the storm. During the final phases of the fight, when you're nearly triumphant, an epic version of the Rito Village theme plays, reminding you of what you're fighting for. After defeating each boss, you awaken one of the 5 sages, who can now continue to be a companion character and allows you to use their abilities at any time. Tulin and Yunobo's abilities are especially useful. In the sky, Tulin can help you reach islands by pushing you further forward. In the caves and the depths, Yunobo makes breaking through rock less of a hassle, also letting you save on breaking your weapons. However, having to activate all the abilities by pressing A next to each sage is irritating. One way this could have been solved is to have the sage abilities all tied to a single activation. Now, this game's UI is great overall, but one change they made is the ability wheel. While I do think this is a much better option for choosing abilities, I find its selection to be strangely off-putting. I'm primarily referring to the amiibo logo and the completely unnecessary map selection. I don't think there's a single explanation for why this is here other than not being able to figure out what else could have been. But considering how clunky the sage abilities are, surely they could have been a way to solve these two problems. This could have been used to choose a sage ability. Afterwards, you'd press L, instantly activating your chosen sage with A ready to be pressed. This way, you wouldn't have to run up to them, you'd only have to press L and then A at any point. This could then default to the sage ability associated with their dungeon, making it easier to do puzzles or boss fights like a traditional item would be. But aside from their associated abilities, the biggest strength of the allies is not their powers or their damage, but being able to take focus away from multiple enemies. As I've stated, one of the main ways the game increases difficulty is by adding a larger number of enemies to overwhelm the player. With each new sage that you have, there's someone else that can distract enemies within a group, taking off large amounts of pressure. This is especially noticeable when fighting multiple of Ganondorf's phantoms. The difficulty of the boss fight found at the end of Hyrule Castle is dependent on whether or not you have all the sages active. Without them, taking on all the phantoms at once can be tricky, especially as they can attack you at different angles as they rush you at the same time. With the sages, different phantoms can be distracted, taking 80% of the focus off the player. The focus of Breath of the Wild's gameplay was never on the main quests and the dungeons. That didn't mean an improvement on them wouldn't be a welcome change. This is especially the case for replayability, when discovery is not as meaningful to the player. Tears of the Kingdom does a great job of bringing in what feels like the return of classic Zelda quests to this open version of Hyrule. These quests contain mini-bosses, riddles, fetch quests, mini-dungeons, and long linear sections that lead you into the larger temples for the player to work through. Saving the villages now feels like a more substantial part of the game. Each part feels distinct, with different dungeons found in very different places, containing their own different bosses, with unique ways that you defeat them. The main quests are, without a doubt, one of the biggest improvements, and it brings me a lot of pleasure to say that I would replay Tears of the Kingdom many times just to play through them again. When being handed an epic adventure, you need to have a narrative that stands alongside the journey. Understanding what this story was about became incredibly clear in one scene, the Sealing of Ganondorf. Through 3 of our main characters, this scene displays how the story and its conclusions come down to faith, insight, and pride. An aspect of this game I loved so much is how Link's destiny as the hero has so much more meaning than other entries. In previous games, the hero is someone who is chosen by the gods, born with the destiny to save Hyrule. While the Links in previous games always prove themselves to be this chosen hero, Tears of the Kingdom approaches this slightly differently. Link is the chosen hero of this era, not just by destiny, but by faith from Zelda. Her journey of travelling back in time causes her to create a plan that revolves around Link, depending on her faith in him. This feels especially rewarding to discover after Breath of the Wild's memories, which show Link and Zelda building this relationship that becomes so fundamental to saving Hyrule. Zelda's plan is also successful because of Rauru. Rauru is a strong judge of character. If it's not obvious from his insight in many of his scenes, it's shown up front with the imagery of his third eye. Every relationship we see him have is based on his knowledge of their character. His marriage to Sonia is in part based on him knowing how much she loves and cares for the people of Hyrule. The plan he puts in place, sacrificing his own life, is heavily dependent on trusting Zelda's faith in Link. And finally, he knows that the best way to defeat Ganondorf is to allow him to be swallowed by his pride. Through Rauru's final words, Ganondorf knows that he will have to face Link upon his return, and despite being told directly, Ganondorf's pride still ends up becoming his downfall. It's great to see the lore started in Breath of the Wild be developed so much further in this game. I loved how it made an effort to give new context to things in this version of Hyrule that reference past Zelda games, even if they may not be directly connected. Whether that's the new origin for the meaning of the Sheikah symbol, or giving great purpose to the jewel on Ganondorf's head. A lot of this game feels like a new story written as a love letter to games of the past. Even some minor things have really cool references, such as the names of the sages referencing Ocarina of Time, as we can infer that the divine beasts were named after the ancient sages, acting almost as their replacement. The sequel really puts in the effort to expand on this world. Whether it's finally telling us the origins of the Great Plateau, or of the Sheikah technology, there's a lot here for Breath of the Wild fans. And perhaps this is me reading too much into things, but I do believe that it explains why the Calamity was so devastating in Breath of the Wild. The Calamity is something that has happened time and time again, a manifestation of Ganondorf's rage as he remains frozen beneath the castle. But the Calamity wins for the first time in Breath of the Wild's history, against the same Zelda and Link that face him when he reawakens. While this may be simply due to the time loop, I think there is importance in the final words Ganondorf hears, Rauru warning him that a swordsman named Link will defeat him. That name is buried in his mind for tens of thousands of years. After Link is born and obtains the Master Sword, the most devastating and cunning form of the Calamity appears. But Tears of the Kingdom's main story revolves around finding 2 answers. What happened in the past and where is Zelda now? A criticism I commonly hear from others is that the game's story is relatively weak. There isn't much of a story at all, and much like Breath of the Wild, too much of the story happens in the past, through memories rather than during the gameplay. I thought about this for a long time, and having as many conversations as I can, yet my opinion on the story has remained relatively consistent. I believe the story is actually a strong and unique entry in the series. It falls short of being great, due to how it's presented. I think we need to consider how the story was presented in Breath of the Wild. Although there were memories you could unlock and lore you could learn, I felt that the story was weak purely because there wasn't much to it, and the majority of the story, which did take place in the past, was explained to you by King Rome after finishing the tutorial. In this one cutscene, you learn that 100 years ago, Link was a knight appointed to protect Princess Zelda, the Calamity came, took over the ancient Sheikah technology, and now Zelda is at Hyrule Castle, holding the Calamity back until you free the Divine Beasts and destroy Calamity Ganon. And that's pretty much it. In fact, a lot of people were able to figure out the entire story of Breath of the Wild way before the game came out just from the trailers. Accessing all the memories in that game did not reveal anything substantially new, at least not anything you didn't already know, and instead gives you some insight into Link and Zelda's relationship. When you leave the Great Sky Island in Tears of the Kingdom, you're left with a lot of mystery. Who is Rauru? What happened to Ganondorf? Where is Zelda? What happened to the Master Sword? These mysteries hover around the player throughout the game, depending on how you approach the story. While a large amount of the mystery can be discovered through lore and playing through the main quests, the majority of the questions are all answered by the Dragon Tears quest. From this quest, you learn where Zelda went, you learn about the history of all the main characters in the game, what happened to the Master Sword, and where Zelda is now. After learning all of this, most of the mystery within the game is now gone. Let's take, for example, the main quest. One of the motivations behind these quests is trying to find out where Zelda is and what has happened to her. Within each quest, you'll see Zelda and sometimes hear about a strange behaviour that she has shown in that region, such as attacking the King of the Zora. At this point, if you've already done the Dragon Tears quest, you already know that A, Zelda has become the Light Dragon, and B, Ganondorf is capable of creating a puppet of Zelda. It becomes very obvious at this point what's happening, with the majority of the mystery within this game being absent. The Tears can give you so much information all at once, and are far too accessible. The player can end up discovering all of the story very early on, ruining the potential to keep it interesting throughout the game, especially if you aren't aware of the order. Let's say you come across the Master Sword glyph while exploring and watch it. This scene contains flashbacks to other memories, including watching Rauru seal Ganondorf and talking about draconification, with Zelda mentioning that she'll be forever changed. Why is this accessible from the very start of the game? This one memory can ruin what a big part of this game is about. I really don't understand what the developers were thinking. The ideal situation would likely involve limiting the Dragon Tears quest till after you defeat Phantom Ganon, which would create a much stronger narrative, especially on your first playthrough. Not knowing what happened in the past, exactly who Ganondorf is, and what has happened to Zelda would keep the mystery intact for the majority of the main quest. One way this could have been done is allow the player to collect the tears at any time, but you can only access the memories at the Forgotten Temple after facing Phantom Ganon. Better still, have a few glyphs activate after completing each temple, with the final memories which take place after seeing Ganondorf unlock only after you finish the Spirit Temple. The greater disappointment of how this is handled also comes from the fact that a large amount of this information can actually be discovered outside of these cutscenes, whether it's through accomplishing the main quest or reading bits of lore that you can find in Zonai Ruins. Of course, if the Dragon Tears quest is already completed, none of this reveals anything, and there is no purpose in trying to discover the mystery this way. It definitely feels that if the game was forced to be a little more linear, the intention would be not to reveal the information found in these memories until you've completed Hyrule Castle, and it can be felt not only in how the quests progress, but even from the dialogue itself. It certainly is a shame considering how significant these reveals are meant to be, especially Zelda's identity as the Light Dragon. There's so many parts of the game that can lead to this conclusion. It's even something that was hinted at as far back as the 2021 trailer, where Zelda's lullaby is played using the same instruments that play the Dragon's theme from Breath of the Wild. There is a strength in the story on how much importance it puts on the Master Sword. The Master Sword's identity in Breath of the Wild acts as a reflection of Link, existing within memories and dialogue representing the hero Link once was, and who he can become once again. This continues in Tears of the Kingdom. Both Link and his sword sustain grave injury, but recover stronger than before to fight again. The sword, after being destroyed by the power of gloom, travels through time to Zelda to become stronger. Through this, the sword is also crucial within the relationship of Link and Zelda, as it contains Zelda's power following her sacrifice and connects their relationship through time. The level barrier to obtain the sword is much more forgiving this time around, requiring only one additional wheel of stamina to pull the sword. The greater challenge is discovering its location and finding a way onto the Light Dragon. While in gameplay the sword acts very similar to how it was before, it has some slight changes in its stats, but also allows you to fuse to temporarily increase its power. This allows it to work like any other weapon handle, as it can become more powerful as you get further through the game. Personally, this isn't exactly how I would have wanted the Master Sword to work. I think something akin to how the Demon King bow works, with increased damage depending on health, would have been more appropriate both in terms of gameplay and lore. Even so, it's still an improvement on the Master Sword from Breath of the Wild, which had a much bigger barrier to be able to pull it, and only really became useful in specific circumstances. This game had such an interesting approach to unlocking the Master Sword. Discovering the story as you play helps you to put the pieces together of where it can be found, but one part of this quest really ruins that mystery and rewards the player inappropriately. Here I'm talking about the Lost Woods. If the game is trying to reward the player for figuring out the Master Sword's location, I do not understand why going to the Lost Woods gives the player such a huge help to finding its location. There is no reason to think it's there other than the fact it was there before. Going to the Lost Woods again to get the sword shouldn't help your progress at all, but not only does it reveal a tracking marker, which on its own makes my eyes roll to the back of my head, but it also causes the light dragon to fly lower, making her easier to access. I find this choice to be really confusing, and it acts as just another way that the quest to uncover the game's mysteries can be ruined if you don't follow the game through a specific order. Still, recovering the Master Sword in this game is an incredibly powerful moment in the story, and remains to be one of my favourite discoveries of this legendary blade. After uncovering the game's mysteries, seeing all the dragon tears, unlocking the sages, and finally reuniting with the Blade of Evil's Bane, you are ready for one final challenge, to head to the location of the Demon King and destroy him once and for all. At the climax of the game, Ganondorf must be found. His location can be discovered in one of two ways, either by completing the side adventure requiring you to chase Master Koga through the depths, or by deducing his location based on the context of the game's story. The prologue to this game was something so special. The way it builds up tension through its atmosphere and music is exhilarating, and not something I thought the game could top. I immediately noticed a difference in this game's climax after starting my descent beneath Hyrule Castle at the game's finale. There is no easy route to access Ganondorf. The final descent into Gloom's lair demands to be played through. As you progress through these gloom-filled tunnels, you'll come across a series of tough enemies. If you decide to run, you're in for a very intense escape. Getting hit just once can cause you to get trapped and bombarded by enemies. If you stand and fight, you'll have to engage in some pretty tough battles. The genius of this final level is the discomfort it causes the player. After spending an entire game being able to fly around and move via any route with such freedom, being forced to navigate a tight corridor removes the options that the player has been so reliant on in their journey. Partway through your descent, you'll return right back to where you started the game, encompassing your entire journey in a loop. Tension builds again at this point, not through a fear of the unknown, but instead a fear of knowing exactly what is waiting for you. The music that built up in the game's prologue now extends even further, becoming heavier and more tense. The Demon King you met last time now awaits for you again, even more powerful than before. The final mystery is uncovered as you return to the murals in the Forgotten Foundation. What was blocked off in the opening can now be discovered, the remaining murals depicting the imprisoning war. As you break down the rubble covering the murals, you can see that all this time, everything you saw in the Dragon's Tears was there all along. The story of Zelda's plan to revive the Master Sword and become an immortal dragon is etched into these walls. A time loop that goes from Zelda falling and returning to the founding of Hyrule to her existence now as an immortal guardian. For me, it really felt like I was uncovering her legend. Her arc is so well fleshed out, especially considering the context of her story in Breath of the Wild. There is a great satisfaction in discovering that Zelda, who is obsessed with the history of Hyrule, was always a fundamental part of it. But only one man has had a greater influence on the destiny of Hyrule for thousands of years, the Demon King himself. After making his way back to where his journey first began, Link dives into the maw of the depths, ready to finally go face to face with his destiny. Before meeting the Demon King himself, Link has to face his army. He is joined by the sages who he helped along his journey. This battle of light against darkness forces you to fight against waves of different enemies, putting your skills against the demon hordes to the test. After taking them all down, versions of the bosses met at each of the temples appear. As long as you help the sages along the way, they will stay and fight against these bosses, leaving Link to go face the Demon King alone. The Ganondorf that we challenge in this game is a new version of him, and is arguably the greatest iteration of the character in the series. He is a terrifying character from the very first interaction with him, and his clear motivation and demand for power is felt in every corner of Hyrule, embedding his presence throughout, whether it's phantoms appearing around the kingdom or his roots spreading through the depths beneath Hyrule. There feels like there is no escape from him. Ganondorf is a man who, being the only male born in the Gerudo, was born to be their king. He values his own strength and power over all. Rauru, who comes from a race with powers almost that of gods, came to Hyrule and became its king, but not through war or a display of the power of the Zonai, but through peace. He married beneath him with the Hylian, people who look up to the Zonai as gods. Ganondorf respects Rauru's power, but he does not respect how he uses it. If Rauru is to be king of Hyrule, he should earn it through war and not peace. Ganondorf's invitation from Rauru to form an alliance is an insult to him, and therefore he plots to obtain more power to be able to take Rauru to war for the title of king. Ganondorf is presented as a smart and cunning man. Even information on the secret stones that only Minoru seem to know, including Draconification, is something that Ganondorf is aware of. We can assume that Ganondorf has attempted to learn about all powers that exist within Hyrule, whether that's the demonic magic he knows or the power of the stones, explaining why he's such a powerful and dangerous individual. There is so much detail in how the game portrays Ganondorf as the foil to Link. While the Demon King takes power from others, Link finds strength and companionship. Throughout the depths, we can see roots leaking out gloom and burning the light, which lead to the centre of Gloom's lair. These roots act in the opposite way to light roots. While light roots connected to shrines bless Link with the power of light to resurrect his strength, Ganondorf's roots feed him darkness, allowing him to build strength to revive as the Demon King. And finally, once you go head to head, you find that Ganondorf's fighting style mirrors Link's, using the same types of weapons and even moves such as flurry rushing. The final confrontation against the Demon King is a 3-stage trial of combat. Many of his moves are reminiscent of those of Phantom Ganon, however the Demon King himself is much more powerful. The first phase has you face Ganondorf as the Gerudo King. He can attack with different weapons and moves, but at this point, he's only really toying with Link and testing his ability. Only after his first health bar is removed does he begin to take the fight seriously. He transforms into the Demon King with his health bar breaking the rules of the game and extending beyond the center. After a display of his power and a threat towards Link, the real fight begins. Multiple phantoms join the Demon King in this fight, making it a lot harder without the sages being able to join the fight and distract them. During this battle, the music that plays in the background will evolve, using themes that take from older games, Breath of the Wild, as well as his new theme. This sets the tone of the fight, reminding the player of the significance this character has had over the entire history of Hyrule. If you attempt to attack him randomly, he has the ability to dodge your attacks and perform a flurry rush on you. You have to engage in this fight, either waiting till he strikes first or countering one of his counterattacks. Once his health bar has reached the halfway point, the Demon King dispels his phantoms and attacks all the sages at once. He taunts Link one last time, and the final fight between them begins. In this final stage, he can dodge even your flurry rushes and counterattack you, requiring you to perfectly dodge 2 attacks in a row. This can initially be difficult, putting pressure on the player to make 2 simultaneously correct choices. However, as Ganondorf dodges a flurry rush, he does have tells, which can hint at which direction you need to be ready to dodge. Much like the Calamity Ganon fight, the fight with Ganondorf actually gives a purpose to the parry attack, but is implemented so much better this time around. If you decide to parry an attack instead of flurry rushing it, he will not be able to dodge your attacks, instantly rewarding the player with an opening. This boss strikes the perfect balance between parrying and flurry rush, with each option having its pros and cons, making the combat feel so much more active. For players that find this combat difficult, there are alternative routes to damaging him. Firstly, you can use any equipment you have to deal damage, including Zonai devices. Decent damage can also be dealt by repelling his projectiles back at him, though this requires the Master Sword. and mistiming this can cause you to permanently lose hearts. This attack is a really cool reference to the Ganondorf fight from Ocarina of Time. Another great layer to the fight is Ganondorf's attacks being embedded with gloom. Any of his basic attacks can temporarily remove Link's hearts, requiring the player to prepare specific gloom healing food for this fight. Additionally, as I said, his projectile attacks can permanently remove hearts during the fight, adding additional pressure to this final duel. This final clash against the Demon King is an incredibly strong fight, requiring the player to either push their skills in one-on-one combat or use their creativity to survive the battle. Without question, this is one of the strongest final fights in the series. At the end of this duel between Ganondorf and Link, the hero comes out triumphant. The Demon King's body snaps back into the position that he was held in for thousands of years, and it's at this moment you can see his complete descent into madness. You watch as a smart, cunning man intent on becoming the King of Hyrule loses all control to bring darkness to the world. Ganondorf let his pride get the best of him once, thinking that destroying the Master Sword and wounding Link was enough. But here, he stands on the brink of defeat. He has to prove Rauru wrong. He has to destroy Link, even if that costs his body and his mind. His pride has fully consumed him, just as Rauru told him it would. This is a moment that is foreshadowed subtly throughout the game. Ganondorf performing the act of Draconification is something that would either take the player by surprise, or would make them feel satisfied in seeing something they predicted come to fruition. This was certainly an I knew it moment for me, one that I can't say has happened in such a satisfying way in many other Zelda games. After defeating Ganondorf in the deepest part of the kingdom, the final stage of the game takes Link into the skies above Hyrule to fight alongside the Light Dragon to take down the Demon King in the form of an immortal dragon. This cinematic conclusion to the game is simple in its gameplay, yet its incredible animation, visuals and music honour this game in a final set piece. While the boss fight does not have much challenge to it, it manages to succeed as an epic conclusion to this game, feeling like a reward for reaching the end more significantly than Dark Beast Ganon did. Both fights fulfill the same role, climactic fights that bring your journey to an end, but this finale is a significant improvement on its predecessor. The fight with the Demon Dragon is far more active, with no waiting time before attacking weaknesses, but using the Light Dragon to ascend the skies before diving down to destroy each of the dragon's weak spots. One of the most important things that makes this fight successful is context. Unlike Dark Beast Ganon, all of this fight is contextualized during the game. Draconification is something the player is aware of. Not only that, but we also know from the Dragon's Tears that Ganondorf is a smart and knowledgeable character, showing awareness of the Secret Stones and their abilities. When I first found out about Draconification, the idea that Ganondorf may employ this power of the stone was in the back of my head. And better yet, the weapon you use to destroy the Demon Dragon is one of the most significant parts of this game. Zelda's entire sacrifice as the Light Dragon is to rebuild the Master Sword into the ultimate weapon against darkness. The blade has been absorbing the power of the Light Dragon for thousands of years, for as long as the Demon King has remained beneath Hyrule. Zelda's sacrifice has led to this moment, a final unforgettable battle in the sky. Taking that final blow with the Master Sword is immensely satisfying, ending this cycle once and for all. During the Demon Dragon fight, I felt like something was missing. While the music for the fight mixes the main theme of the game with Ganondorf's original theme so well, I initially felt that they should have incorporated the main riff of the game's theme. I was surprised that it wasn't used during the climax in the same way it was with Dark Beast Ganon, especially because the main theme builds up towards this final melody during the battle, yet it never fully plays. But I was very wrong. While many people will have opinions that can vary on how this story is presented and how strong it is, a part of the game that is undeniably strong is the themes in the story that hold strong throughout. One that holds the strongest is the themes of cycles, but especially bringing them to an end. There are so many cycles within the game. There's the fact that the game begins and ends beneath Hyrule Castle, and the story takes place within a fixed time loop. But the theme of ending cycles is even more present. Calamity Ganon was a cycle that existed throughout Hyrule's history, with no apparent end. But during the final phase against Ganondorf, the Calamity Ganon theme plays, reminding you that this is an opportunity to end it. And the main theme of Tears of the Kingdom does not finish its riff during the final fight against the Demon Dragon. But why? The main theme of the game first plays very subtly, when Zelda falls and Link fails to catch her. But it is only during the final dive, when Zelda is returned to her true self and Link is finally able to end this journey and catch her, does the main theme play in full. Tears of the Kingdom was an inevitable sequel. Breath of the Wild was successful across the board with its world, art style, characters, and gameplay. There was always going to be a continuation. Looking back at my criticisms of Breath of the Wild, I can't quite believe how almost every single thing I wanted to be changed did get changed, and sometimes in ways that were even better than I could have hoped. When it came to balancing out the game to encourage exploration, I wanted ore to be worth less rupees, harder to find, or for there to be a crafting system that gave an alternative use, and we got all three. Not only that, but the crafting system improved so many different balancing aspects to the game. Weapons are no longer as precious, and fighting enemies is more worthwhile. Ultra Hand and Fuse are more than just abilities, but ways to add an extra layer of interaction. Puzzles can be expanded, requiring the player to make their own items with what's around them in order to progress. I wanted side quests to be more involved with the game's story and give you more meaningful rewards. With the introduction of the new side adventure tier, there is so much more to do within Hyrule. You're no longer forced to only take on shrines to earn significant upgrades. The mainline quests are huge improvements at every level. A variety of tasks, riddles without map markers that make you think, mini-bosses, mini-dungeons, combat trials, each one stands out and stands strong. And of course, the changes to the dungeons, with their own linear section to add the classic style of puzzle-based traversal to every dungeon. The temples themselves are larger and more expansive, sometimes requiring you to figure out where you're going to go and how you get there, while also solving puzzles along the way. Within the dungeons are tests of your equipment and skills. There are far more enemies to find in temples than what were in Divine Beasts, which scale in difficulty based on your progress. The temple's bosses are far more varied, each with their own moves and ways to defeat them that scale in difficulty also, punishing you for being unprepared. All of these changes to the sequel, as well as the large additions to the world with the caves, sky islands and depths, create a more expansive, rewarding and replayable adventure within this Kingdom of Hyrule. Despite this, Tears of the Kingdom has almost become a controversial topic, with criticism ranging from minor to extreme. So what is it about the sequel which fell short of people's expectations? And if it did everything that I personally wanted, why do I hesitate to call it perfect? One issue that I have with the game is actually similar to one I had with Breath of the Wild: balancing. Where Breath of the Wild had issues with balancing its weapons and rupees, Tears of the Kingdom introduces a new problem: Zonai devices and Zonite. While I've spoken about this a few times before, I do want to say that this is really the rupee problem in a new form, a balancing issue that gets worse on repeat playthroughs. So what does this affect? Well, firstly, circumventing the puzzles and exploration in this game by using Zonai devices is not an inherently bad idea, but its ease of access lowers the quality of exploration. After a certain point, traversal simply doesn't exist. Even in Breath of the Wild, if you hadn't climbed a mountain yet, you couldn't easily circumvent this. You must still climb no matter how far into the game you are. What annoys me about this issue is how simple I find the problem: the Zonai dispensers. These machines give you so many Zonai devices, with a very simple trade-off. This causes the loss of difficult puzzles and the requirement for traversal. What's worse is that this creates another reason to not need to go into the depths. The idea of using auto-build to create vehicles and other useful machines is great, especially by using a currency that is only found within the depths. But this is avoided by simply having enough devices from the Zonai dispensers that allows you to build them at no further cost. Despite being a much larger game, these items can cause the player to explore less than they did in Breath of the Wild. But we've had balancing issues before. Breath of the Wild's side content and upgrades could be ignored, especially if you sold items, as the main barrier in mainline quests was buying the correct armor. So every time I replay Breath of the Wild, I give myself a rule that I'm not allowed to sell anything, which forces me to engage in more content. And similarly, I've enjoyed replays of Tears of the Kingdom a lot more when I do not allow myself to use the Zonai dispensers. I even end up using my horse significantly more to save on Zonite. Balancing isn't something that stops it from being a masterpiece. The balancing issues in Breath of the Wild were far more significant to me, and it's still a masterpiece of game design that will stand the test of time. So if Tears of the Kingdom has tighter balancing, better abilities, more enemies, more bosses, a larger world and a stronger mainline quest, why isn't it also considered a masterpiece? It's at this point after sitting with the game for so long that I finally know where my main issue lies. Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel that exists as a love letter to Breath of the Wild. It expands on the lore of this new Hyrule, filling in gaps in its history and adding more depth to this world and its characters. And everything before that wasn't quite perfect has been adjusted to make everything that little bit more engaging. It gives you Breath of the Wild, but with more refined systems in a world that is now bigger and more epic. But there lies the problem. Tears of the Kingdom does not veer away from its predecessor enough. Everything new added to this game outside a new mainline quest can almost be completely ignored. Most of what you need exists across the surface, only this time around there are tools and abilities in the game that allow you to fly around and not engage with the world. It almost feels like it was scared to change what was already successful and revolutionary about Breath of the Wild, and thus stops itself from being something even greater. Breath of the Wild was so close to perfect that it's almost negligible, but Tears of the Kingdom creates so much extra potential, so much that could make it stand out and be even more impressive, but it holds back on fleshing out these parts and making them more important to the core experience of this game. This, retrospectively, makes the game seem much weaker. This stretches out to many parts of the game, where it's weakened by forcing itself to be closer to Breath of the Wild. One of the most significant victims of this is the narrative. Unlike Breath of the Wild, this game gave you cutscenes and memories at different points during the main quest. I'm referring to the cutscene unlocked at Hyrule Castle and the Spirit Temple, but this should have been the start of breaking down the mysteries. Most of the main quest, as well as a ton of the side adventures, act as if you don't know where Zelda is or what happens during the imprisoning war. But before you even do the first dungeon, you can have the whole mystery ruined for you. I genuinely believe the story in this game is one of the best in the series, but it's so hard to argue that when so many players had the whole story flashbanged at them in the first few hours. This story deserved a more linear approach, with a mystery that slowly unravels as you progress through the game, and didn't need to copy Breath of the Wild's memory format. There's also the issue of Tears of the Kingdom prioritizing activities that you could do in Breath of the Wild over anything you can do that is new. Whether that's almost all of the game's upgrades being done through shrines, shrine quests mostly using old bosses instead of new ones, or the majority of the shrines being on the surface. Your first time reaching the depths likely pulls you back into that feeling of wonder, discovering something you didn't really know would be there, but after your initial journey in the depths, most of that wonder is missing, and the game offers too many ways to encourage the player to avoid engaging with them entirely. Ever since The Dark World in A Link to the Past, the idea of this parallel or darker Hyrule has been constant throughout Zelda games, from the darker future in Ocarina of Time to the Twilight Realm and Lorule in A Link Between Worlds. This could have been Tears of the Kingdom's Dark World, with the connectivity between the two having a lot more significance. But this opportunity was almost completely missed because unlike the other entries in the series, it doesn't feel like a challenge that is required to be taken up by the player. We find ourselves with a map, equal in size to the overworld, yet limited to being used to help you find missing shrines via light routes, get some fresh base weapons, and upgrade your energy cell. Breath of the Wild was successful in encouraging exploration through shrines. They could be anywhere, any corner you hadn't explored could have a shrine that you had not yet completed. So what's the depths version of this? Light routes don't encourage exploration because they're the only thing you can see, and instead make the area more visible. But more visible to encourage what? There are things to find in the depths, but these rewards are weak. Zonite isn't completely necessary, and Yiga schematics are cool, but the player would probably want to create their own designs. And Pose are just a way to buy things that you would earn by exploring the depths. This is a whole other currency that you can only find here, yet they aren't given a good enough purpose that makes the player want to go into the depths to find more. Why couldn't they be used for something more important, such as armor upgrades, to make depths exploration more significant? There really needed to be something like the shrines to find in this underworld, something that makes the player want or need to go to every corner of this darker world to find things that they're missing. This game had an amazing opportunity to do something different and stand out against its predecessor. For me, the perfect scenario would be replacing the shrines on the surface with a different way to earn hearts and upgrades, mostly via the depths, or at least involving them. Perhaps light routes would be important in unlocking shrines, with Yiga fortresses and other enemies and separate puzzles that block the light routes that you need to figure out, which would then activate a shrine on the surface. Yes, this would still reuse the surface partially, but taking some of the puzzles to the connected overworlds, rather than just inside the shrines, would give it that edge over Breath of the Wild. While writing this, it came to my attention that this actually does exist in the game. The Great Plateau was one of the best challenges outside of the main quest by far. It required you to find these eyes that were around the surface that you had to chuck towards a chasm. You must then enter the depths and traverse them to deliver the eyes, rewarding you with a heart container. This was perfect, and honestly what I feel most of the game should have been. Puzzles that connect the different areas of the world together, requiring your knowledge of a map that you do know, and challenging you with a map that you don't. This one quest, to me, shows that the game was willing to start deviating away from Breath of the Wild and actually use the wider world that they created. Don't get me wrong, I love shrines, but there are other ways to keep these puzzles without copying Breath of the Wild's format that would have actually used the depths. Even on Hyrule's surface, there are areas that still remain relatively untouched, with little incentive to fully explore them. 4 of the 5 main quests take place in the same areas, dungeons which copy styles and music of the Divine Beasts, and a final confrontation in central Hyrule. Why was the Lost Woods confined to just being a place that helps you get the Master Sword? Especially with the way that it's designed, a new area could have been added without breaking the immersion. And while the game's story and themes couldn't allow for the climax of the game to take place anywhere else other than beneath Hyrule Castle, part of me is still somewhat disappointed that the final dungeon wasn't entered from Death Mountain as a reference to the final level in the original Zelda. Other areas, including Akala, Hebra, and Necluda, could have been expanded on. What about the Zonai ruins in the Ridgeland, or a temple beneath Lake Hylia? They could have used the same villagers and characters, but allowed the adventure to lead you to previously unexplored places. This is why the 5th quest is so refreshing. Not only does it involve a different village, as well as the mostly untouched Faron region, but it allows the quest to take place over different areas. The village, linear section, and temple for this quest can all be found in different places, really taking advantage of the size of this world. It might not matter much, but there's no doubt exploring different areas would help make the quests feel more unique. And yet, despite its flaws, Tears of the Kingdom is something I love. No matter how varied opinions on this game may be, there is something special about a development team being able to return to a world once limited by time constraints to realise their full vision. The ability to view the entire world of Hyrule as you dive through the sky is still amazing. And with each playthrough, I'm creating new items to get through this adventure. While exploration is fundamental to these new Zelda games, the mainline quests are strong enough that we can compare it to other games in the series. There are different tasks in each area, dungeons that include both linear trials and open challenges, and unique bosses that feel like a reward for finishing each quest. I strongly think that the way the story is presented is a mistake, but only because of how much I care for the story itself. It's so heavily character driven, with specific relationships and motivations being the deciding factor in how this story plays out. No matter how the player accesses the story, the game's final moments can stir an emotional response, creating an unforgettable ending. Perfection is something that is incredibly difficult to achieve. This game can only exist by building on the foundations of its predecessor, but it didn't deviate away from them enough. I do genuinely believe that almost everything Tears of the Kingdom copies from Breath of the Wild, from the weapon system to dungeons, side quests, and especially the main quests, Tears of the Kingdom does much better. But this is because it was willing to change them. The game has great new ideas, things that could have made it stand out as something great on its own, but it doesn't fully commit. And perhaps this is why it's not considered the masterpiece that Breath of the Wild is. Even so, it proved something to me. The magnificence of Breath of the Wild was not luck. They knew where they wanted to take their series, and how this new style of Zelda game could become even more open and complex, and I hope this is the direction that the series continues to take. No matter what criticisms I have of Tears of the Kingdom, whether that's the balancing, enemies, the different maps, I am glad this game was made, even if it was for nothing more than introducing an epic adventure that takes place in a Hyrule I got to know and love. I don't think Tears of the Kingdom is a bad sequel. And it's definitely not a bad game. It's a great game, just one that buries something even greater within it. This sequel still managed to be what I hoped. These new Zelda games have re-achieved what the series had accomplished in the 80s, but have now taken it further than we could have imagined. A game where the sky, the surface, and the land beneath are free to explore, where weapons can be crafted in any way you need with any items you find. Objects are free to build with and create your own tools and machines. Mountains can be swam through, and time itself can be manipulated. Hyrule has never been so free to explore, and finding Zelda has never meant so much. I've been a fan of the Legend of Zelda series for as long as I can remember, and this game did what Zelda games always do best. It reminded me why.